This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. When something epic happens, something immense happens, you always presume and indeed immediately respond as if the ramifications will be as epic. You know, the size of the stone that is tossed into the lake determines the size and the extent of the ripples, doesn't it? But it doesn't always work like that. Something truly huge can happen and its ramifications are not as enormous as the original event. I don't know where we are yet. Do you want to know a secret, by the way? Nobody knows. Not only does nobody know what the motivation of Donald Trump's wannabe assassin was, people pointing to the fact that he's a registered Republican voter, people also pointing to the fact that he gave a few quid to a left-leaning organisation a few years ago. Most people pointing to the fact that he wouldn't be able to buy a car in America, but he wouldn't be able to buy a beer in America, but he could buy a semi-automatic weapon, although I don't think he did. Again, more stuff coming out of the details in the course of the day. It looks like he borrowed his father's gun. But nobody knows the motivation of the putative assassin. But equally, nobody actually knows what the ramifications will be. We know how big the rock that has been thrown into the lake is, but we don't know how big the ripples will be. And I was leaning towards the idea that it wouldn't have that big an effect upon American politics or upon the American election. And then two things happened. One, I guess I would file under optimism, and one I would probably file under pessimism. The first thing that happened was Donald Trump calling for or planning to make a plea for unity, claiming in an interview with the Washington Examiner that he has torn up the text of a speech that he was due to give today at the Republican National Convention, or certainly he's giving it at that convention, which would focus on Joe Biden and be more traditionally Trumpian, and give a speech instead that sought to bring unity, bring a country together, that sought to make a plea for unity. And I didn't even know how to process that. Do you know how to process that? And the likelihood that Donald Trump suddenly discovers a vocabulary and a modus operandi that he has never displayed before, either in business or in politics. The idea that the long litany of abuses of everything from disabled people to women, the appalling rhetoric regarding genuine war heroes like John McCain on his own side of the political divide. Would he suddenly, truly, as a consequence of a near-death experience, emerge entirely transformed? I find that unlikely, but that's what I mean by optimism. It's also the curse of the liberal, isn't it? Always hoping that the sun will come up tomorrow. And then the second bit of the same interview, that really sent me off down a slight. My producer Eleanor pointed it out, actually, and it really stung. It really resonated. It really landed. Before I tell you what it is, here is just a quote from the interview he's given to the Washington Examiner. The speech I was going to give on Thursday was going to be a humdinger. Had this not happened, this would have been one of the most incredible speeches, aimed mostly at the policies of Joe Biden. That second bit not in quotes. Honestly, it's going to be a whole different speech now. So he hasn't, from the sounds of that, he hasn't changed much. But the element of what this call for unity might look like, he says, this is a chance to bring the whole country, even the whole world, together. The speech will be a lot different than it would have been 2 days ago. That's optimistic, right? That would be amazing. Imagine if Donald Trump gave a speech calling for peace and unity, possibly even compassion. But then the line about being saved by God just opened up the possibility of some sort of messianic claim emerging in the course of the next 24 or 48 hours. Some because the following that he already has in America is almost impossible to categorize. You can't describe the umbrella under which they all sit. You know, the sheer numbers make it impossible to say what a typical Trump voter is. There must be something that they have in common, and we may get onto that a little later on the program. But the idea that he might use this to sort of claim a God-anointed legitimacy for a return to the White House, for those of us who don't want him to return to the White House, that I think is a possibility. That is perhaps a probability. I don't know. We shall see. I use that merely to illustrate the fact nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows why the assassination attempt was made, and nobody knows what the assassination attempt will do to the American election. There are two modes of response to something like this. There is the objective and there is the subjective. So to begin with the objective, political violence is always wrong. Political violence is always wrong, even or perhaps especially when it is directed at people who call for political violence. Those of us who recognise how awful it is, both in the in the actuality, in the execution, but also in the rhetoric that leads to it. You know, whether it's a breaking point poster or whether it is seeking to overturn a democratic result. The people who seem comfortable with political violence are the people who everybody must defend first when political violence is directed at them. That is literally what objectivity means. That is a fundamental foundation stone of democracy. Even people who threaten democracy deserve to be defended by the parameters of democracy. That's objective. Objectively, it doesn't matter who the subject of an assassination attempt is. You can't change your opinion about the relevance, the importance, the horror of an attempted assassination according to whether or not you like the person who is being targeted, whether or that is objective. Subjectively, you can wonder about character, you can wonder about decency, you can wonder about whether or not the climate that Donald Trump and his supporters have helped to create. Alex Jones, one of Donald Trump's loudest supporters, the conspiracy theorist who claimed that the Sandy Hook school massacre was a hoax and it was perpetrated by actors. He was claiming in whatever program it is that he does now not long ago that the assassination of Donald Trump would be the best thing that could possibly happen in the interests of people who want a sort of second American revolution, who want a complete attack upon whatever you want to call it, liberalism or centrism or I don't know, peacefulness. That's on tape. I've seen that. I've watched it. Again, we don't know whether the person who tried to kill Donald Trump has seen any of that, but there are so many different, what's the word that you want here? Interpretations of what we already know, that the inevitability of trying to extrapolate from that what we think will happen next is, well, it's crystal clear, isn't it? 12 minutes after 10 is the time. The subjective, I think, includes that initial response. Or is that objective? I mean, I don't think you need me to remind you what my opinions of Donald Trump's role in the denigration of democracy on both sides of the Atlantic have been, or the dangers that a second presidency would pose to America and to American people, to many, many American people. But I found in the moment, in the nanosecond, that defiant response, which has been immortalized in a photograph that will become part of the pictorial vocabulary of 21st century history, I found that defiant response very impressive. Yeah, that's what I mean by objective. You forget who it is and focus entirely on the moment. And that is the very, very recent recipient of an assassination attempt responding with his fist in the air. When he shouted fight, I don't know who he was encouraging his supporters to fight, but the defiance encapsulated in that moment was actually remarkable. It was objectively remarkable. It probably gets more remarkable, magnified, because of the power of the photograph that was taken. But still, what would you be doing? Probably you'd still be on the ground. You might still be hiding. You might be desperate to keep your face out of any sort of firing line. You'd be cowering under the jackets of your Secret Service. I don't know. But I just found objectively, whoever it had been, had it been Barack Obama, Donald Trump or Jimmy Carter, whoever it had been, I found that action remarkable. But it doesn't in any way diminish my disgust at much of what Donald Trump has done in the past and much of what he represents. So there's the objective and the subjective. And then there is the predictive. And that is where we'll start this morning. Your opinion is, to me at least, as interesting as anybody who gets paid for it. The idea that this is going to make a significant and measurable difference to American politics in general and, of course, the November presidential election in particular really intrigues me. I don't know that I buy the idea of a wobbly Trump supporter, the idea that I wasn't going to vote for him, but I am now. But then we're being intellectual rather than emotional, What do you think this is going to do to American politics? That's the question I'd like you to answer first up this morning. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I note from my inbox already let's just say a fair degree of skepticism at the notion that he might suddenly turn into a conciliatory person. That's a great word. Thank you, Al. I'll be using that a bit. I completely agree, but you never know. Stranger things have happened. But what do you think this will do to American politics? I've got one more problem, actually, to share with you, seeing as I'm answering my question before inviting you to do the same. And when they talk about dialing down the rhetoric, when they talk about trying to almost a sort of both sidesism, that really worries me. Because what you have on the Democrat side of political discourse in America is a charge sheet. You have a long list of things that Donald Trump has said and done. And then you have a long list of things that Donald Trump's supporters have said and done, including the one who recently said that they are heading towards a second American revolution. And if the left let them, then there need not be any bloodshed. So we know that. And then on the Donald Trump supporting side of the argument, you have quite a lot of lies. You have people who believe, for example, that there was a paedophile ring operating from the basement of a pizza restaurant in New York City. You have people who believe that Hillary Clinton drinks the blood of babies. You have people who believe that the Sandy Hook massacre was some sort of hoax. People who believe that the World Economic Forum is secretly dedicated to the destruction of democracy. So when you dial down rhetoric in political discourse that often pits evidence against lies, it pits... And, I almost wish I had to exaggerate here to make my point, but I don't. Because when you have a political discourse that pits facts, observable facts, against what Donald Trump's press secretary called alternative facts, but which are previously known as lies, how do you dial down that discourse? And if you do somehow dial down that discourse, does that involve the people telling the truth turning down the volume and just hoping that the people telling the lies do the same? That's when the dust settles. The big worry for me about what Joe Biden has said and what Donald Trump has said. It's almost as if both sides have to dial down the rhetoric, but one side doesn't really use rhetoric. I'm talking about putting Donald Trump in the bullseye in terms of campaigning, to pretend that is in any way insightful or deliberately conjuring up militaristic images. That is obviously pathetic, but it might just be politics as usual. But the long list of lies and abuses that Donald Trump has visited upon his political opponents is of an entirely different order from the political devices that Joe Biden would use to criticize and condemn Donald Trump. So when they talk about, and I understand why they've done it, but when they talk about dialing down the rhetoric, I kind of find myself thinking that nudges us closer, perhaps, to the conflation of actual facts with alternative facts. And that's where Biden finds himself in an incredible pickle, I would argue. I suppose there's one silver lining from his point of view. The debates about his suitability for the candidacy, I suspect, will be quietened enormously now to the point of probably disappearing, or at least not appearing within the time frame necessary to make a change before the November election. So 18 minutes after 10 is the time. So there's quite a lot to get your teeth into there. And it's also important to remember that one man died. Corey Comperatore, a former fire chief who died shielding his wife and daughter. His name should be spoken. I don't know that the name of the gunman should be, but it will be. Thomas Matthew Crooks. We need to know why he did what he did with the semi-automatic rifle apparently owned by his father, and we won't be able to ask him because he was shot dead by the Secret Service. But in the context of what we know, what we do know, what do you think it's going to do? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 21 minutes after 10, and it may be that the answer is not much. It will not make much difference to the greater scheme of things. But of course, to nudge the election in a direction different from the way it would have gone previous to this weekend's events would be enough to change the next incumbent at the White House. So, it might not change much, but it would still be enough to make enormous difference to the future of the free world. Scott's in Red Hill. Scott, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. Good to hear from you again.
Likewise. Thank you. I think I'm supposed to say that, aren't I?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Go on.
So I woke up to the news and spoke to my friends in America, and now I'm convinced that we are going to see a Trump presidency after what happened.
Yes. Why? Because they've told you they're more likely to vote for him? I think Tom mentioned some relatives he has this morning whose resolve has been stiffened by the events of the weekend. Is that what your friends were telling you?
Kind of. So the friends I have, half of them are like bolted on, we're going to vote for Biden.
Yes.
And the other half are, we're going to vote for Trump. The ones that are swaying in between are the whole time they've been questioning, obviously, Biden's ability to be president, obviously, of all the news that we've been seeing. And after this weekend, I think they look at Trump. We're questioning Biden's mental competence, and then you see Trump survive a assassination attempt. It's only going to embolden that side. So
yeah,
in my head, I'm convinced. I don't want to see it, but I'm absolutely convinced now we are going to live with the Trump presidency for the next 4 years.
And God knows what happens beyond that, because his willingness to dismantle the basic frameworks of democracy is irrefutable and well established. I think, and it's a dreadful word, but even the most dreadful words sometimes are the perfect words. You're talking about optics, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you can't. He looked strong in that moment.
Absolutely.
In that moment, with his
up.
fist raised and his defiant demeanor, he looked strong, whether or not he was. Hysterical or how, it doesn't matter. He looked strong, and Biden looks fragile. He looks fragile, and that is crystallized now.
No, he looked calm. That's the problem. He got up, put his hand in the air, with a fist pumped, and he didn't look scared at all. He looked absolutely undeterred. He looked like a man on a mission. And that, unfortunately, has not been the case with Biden.
No, I don't think I can argue with you, but I can wonder who we're talking about. Who are we imagining with the question of wobble? Are we talking about anyone minded to vote for him will now be more likely to do so, and anyone minded to vote for Biden will perhaps be a bit less likely to do so as his fragility becomes clearer? We're not talking about a kind of mythical swing voter who somehow goes from a definite Biden to a definite Trump as a consequence of what we saw in Milwaukee.
Well, I disagree, actually. I think,
really?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of people there would have actually been questioning, like, I can't vote for Trump. It's the same thing of, like, if you think of, like, the country here in the UK, there's a lot of people who think, okay, I'm conservative, but I'm not a Johnsonian.
Yeah.
I'll hold my nose if I really, really have to, because I can't vote for Labour, but I might just spoil my vote. I think there's a lot of people in the US that are the same thing. They say, well, I can't vote for Trump because he's a Trumpian.
I'm a Republican, but I can't vote for Trump.
Correct. And I just think this is now completely swung. I honestly think that this has actually won a lot of those votes. And that's what worries me the most.
Well, that makes it's game over then. And he won't just win, he'll win huge. Because if you tempt back that constituency, well, Biden's tempting very few people. And what you're describing in some ways is that it's almost going to sort of destroy the never Trump vote. The people who... I don't quite get that. We'll talk more. Thank you, Scott. Other people can pick up on this theme. The idea that those events, that imagery somehow dilutes or diminishes the established depravity of Donald Trump's political career and personal attitudes. He's an adjudicated rapist. He's a self-confessed sex offender. He's a convicted felon. But Scott might be right. It might not matter, or it might matter even less to some waverers than it did when they were wavering. Because if you're wavering against the backdrop of what I've just described off the top of my head, I haven't mentioned the abuse, the obvious abuse of the disabled journalist, the incitement of an attempt to overthrow a democratic election. If you're already wavering before all of that has happened, then this can only push you further in the direction of Donald Trump, can't it? It's certainly not going to lure you back to the place where decency mattered. Adam's in Edinburgh. Adam, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How are you?
Very well. What's on your mind?
I want to agree with almost everything your previous caller just said.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I'm happy about the news. So my original point was going to be that I hoped that the events of Saturday evening would be a unity moment, very similar to COVID lockdown in terms of there's a thing that's come up in society that is a danger to all of us. We are all fearful of it, political violence.
Yes.
That people would come together under that one umbrella as a sense of comfort, of togetherness. But long term, we will all go back to our individual groups.
Yes.
And we feel long term, we feel more comfortable in those individual groups. So do I think this will have a long term impact on American politics? Sadly not. Because Republicans are Republicans and Democrats are Democrats, and they will always agree on fundamental issues. But for the time being, yes, we would all come together. It's been nice to see people on the left. So do you think that will happen?
I can't quite imagine what that would sound like. Donald Trump making a plea for unity, treating opponents with equanimity and decency and compassion. I don't know what he means when he says he's going to make a plea for unity, and Trump uses words in ways that can often not be recognised by the rest of us. I truly love our country and love you all and look forward to speaking to our great nation this week. A plea. What would a plea for unity sound like from a man who, has attacked almost everybody and everything that unity would hold dear over the last few years?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I suppose we're going to find that answer out one way or another. I don't think he's the smartest man in the world, to put it politely.
Well, he's got a sort of diabolical genius to him, though. He's quite unique in the sense of being able to whip up corners of the community, which again makes it harder for me to understand how he's going to, for want of a better phrase, whip up people who like unity. What does he mean when he uses that word? Does he mean something different from the rest of us?
I think he believes that he is now going to be portrayed as the victim, and he's going to use that.
Hero. Sorry, I keep talking over you. You carry on.
No, you're right. He's going to be perceived as the victim. He's the one that has been literally shot at. He's the one that's been indicted. He's the one that's been prosecuted and convicted, does need to be noted. Okay. He will try and use this as a moment to say, I'm now the victim in all this. Have pity on me, vote for me. And it will absolutely be enough to get over the finish line.
So you conflate the assassination attempt, which was illegal, disgusting and wrong, with the prosecutions, which are legal, well evidenced and right, and somehow you diffuse the potential hazard of being a convicted felon or being an adjudicated rapist. You make it all part of a narrative of unfair persecution, and they're already doing that.
Yeah,
oh, boy.
you can turn this into a system where people have pity on me, and he probably knows that the Democrats and Biden are too weak to do anything about it, and he will ride this coattail into the White House.
And you can't attack him now on the grounds that you could attack him last week, because they'll talk about how you're contributing to a kind of rhetorical environment in which this terrible stuff happens, even though the rhetorical environment in which truly disgusting stuff undertaken by mobs of people and by elected politicians and by senior members of or at least very well-paid members of the media, and by his former campaign manager, who is currently in jail. You'll do that conflation thing. The more we talk about it, the more worried I get, and the more certain I am that the single most significant moment in American politics of the last 10 years was the coining of the phrase alternative facts. I got very, very excited about it at the time, but things have dissipated, not least because Biden's been in the White House. But when somebody very high up in a president's staff publicly and unashamedly seeks to describe lies as being an equal and opposite force to the truth, of equal value, then something really fundamental changes. And that is, I think Donald Trump's son's already done this. He's already said, I don't want to hear anything more about January the 6th after what happened in Milwaukee. And you're like a registered Republican loner with his dad's gun attempted to assassinate Donald Trump. How on what possible planet is that relevant to a mob of people baying for the blood of his own vice president being incited by Donald Trump? And of course, the answer to that is on this planet here, this planet right here, the planet we're discussing, the planet where facts and alternative facts are simply a matter of preference rather than a matter of objective and established contradiction. 10:31 is the time. Couple of phone lines free. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What is this going to do to the electoral calculus, to the presidential election, and why? And we've got a couple of other questions to move on to as well, but I'll keep those in reserve for the time being. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. I think Jonathan in Deal is probably onto something here, and it echoes what I suggested to you, and indeed what the producer of the programme suggested to me when we were chewing the fat before coming on air today. He can now say they've tried everything to stop me, they even shot me, but God is on our side, or words to that effect, and it does two or three things at the same time. It hardens the support of the evangelical Christian right. It dilutes the importance and impact of his criminality, both established and still prosecuted, being prosecuted. It turns every criticism of him into part of the same process, which we've seen his son attempt to do already, and it takes away even the incredible associations with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, which are only beginning to emerge to full effect in the last couple of weeks. All of that just gets filed under, and they tried to shoot him too. Pull the other one, what's next? I honestly think that's going to happen. I think it's happening already. I don't know how much of America falls for it. I don't know how big a difference it makes, but that I would be very, very surprised if that is not what defines the next few weeks of American politics, possibly the next few months. It will simply be that every criticism or condemnation from of Donald Trump gets filed by his supporters, some of whom will know exactly what they're doing, some of them will not. Gets filed under all part of the same process of trying to stop him, whether it's happening in a courtroom or whether it's happening at a rally in Pennsylvania. I think I said Milwaukee by accident 10 minutes ago, so sorry about that. Milwaukee is where he's going for the Republican convention, where his candidacy will be confirmed. Pennsylvania is obviously, and of course, where his right ear was grazed by a bullet fired from outside the security cordon. Back to the phones in a second. I've got two friends, one of whom I have consulted, not specifically on this issue, and one of whom I haven't. One works in close security as a police officer, but the other is head of security, which is a massive job for a massive rock band. And it's extraordinary how much attention is put into the threat of shooters on roofs of stadia and things like that. I mean, it is truly extraordinary. It's a PhD level of study, and you have to be, it sounds like you're a glorified bouncer, you have to be an absolute genius to undertake that level of security provision. And one of the first things I thought, actually, when the details began to filter through on Saturday night, Sunday morning, one of the first things I thought was, how the heck did that happen? You would generally scope out in person every site from which this sort of attack could be launched. And given the febrile nature of conspiracy theories in America anyway, where this one goes is anybody's guess. 10:38 is the time. I'll read you that from Jonathan in Deal again, because I do suspect this is the way forward. Hi, James. He can now say they've tried everything to stop me. They even shot me, but God is on our side. And in the context of America, that becomes an almost unstoppable momentum, I think. Thomas is in Ipswich. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for taking the call. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for having the phone-in topic. I imagine it's going to get quite dark, so it's a fair play for having it. I completely agree with your previous caller, and I completely agree with everything you've said just now. I think perhaps in some countries where there is more political stability, it would have done a greater job at uniting people. But with the level of polarization, which, let's not forget, Trump's rhetoric has played a huge part in creating, it's only going to push people further apart. It would call me cynical, but I'm afraid, looking at the civility or the lack thereof of political discourse in the last few years, I just can't see people coming together and uniting over something like this.
That's why I don't understand the headline where Trump makes plea for unity, unless it is Trump makes plea for everybody to gather under his banner. So here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the, I hesitate to use the kind of throwaway lines I would once have used about her because of what I'm about to read to you. Yeah. But we can at least say she's a very staunch supporter of Donald Trump and a very enthusiastic deployer of what they like to call alternative facts. So she's written this. We are in a battle between good and evil. That's in capital letters. The Democrats are the party of paedophiles, murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. They want to lock up their political opponents and terrorize innocent Americans who would tell the truth about it. The Democrat Party is flat out evil, and yesterday they tried to murder President Trump. Now, I don't know if this event had happened 10 years ago, whether that kind of contribution would have got anywhere near public discourse, would have got anywhere. Go on. Sorry, just to jump on that, I don't think she would have become an elected official 10 years ago. So it's all about context, isn't it? This attempt, this assassination attempt in the context of where America is and what has happened is unprecedented.
Absolutely. To use a very good word that's never been used before.
It's an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented. The Democrat Party is flat out evil, and yesterday they tried to murder President Trump. Trump, of course, whose associations with the dead paedophile Jeffrey Epstein are legion, but it is, according to this woman, the Democrats who are the party of paedophiles, murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody, meaningless, endless wars. So I think everyone in Kyiv this morning will know exactly what's meant by that. Paige is in High Wycombe. Paige, what would you like to say?
First, I just want to highlight that it was a Republican, a registered Republican.
I have mentioned that. I've mentioned that quite a few times.
I missed the top of the show.
No, don't worry. I don't think it can be mentioned often enough. But it is being reported alongside a claim that he also donated $15 to a left-leaning organisation. But yeah, he is a registered Republican. So quite how Marjorie Taylor Greene can claim that the Democrats tried to murder Donald Trump is. Well, I don't think there's much mystery about why she's doing it, is there?
But I want to say nothing's changed.
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody sitting on the fence that now that Trump's been shot is like, oh no, now I have to support Trump.
What about Robert Kennedy
I don't think
fans?
those people exist.
What about Robert Kennedy voters? Do they might fit in that category?
I don't know what's in the minds of Robert Kennedy voters, to be honest.
No.
I honestly can't speak to them, but we're not voting for Biden or Trump in November. We're voting for democracy or authoritarianism. Have you read Project 2025?
I haven't read all of it, but I've been on a bit of a crash course this weekend. And I mean,
That's what we're looking at come January 20th, 2025, if Trump is elected.
Well, just give people listening a thumb.
Biden has to be the candidate because there are Republicans that will vote for Biden. There is no other candidate that Republicans would say, yeah, he can have my vote, or she.
What about the optics, to use that dreadful word? What about the obvious age-related fragility of Joe Biden?
I don't think it matters.
Versus that iconic image, and it's already iconic, and it's barely 24 hours old, that iconic image of Trump with blood on his face and his fist in the air.
Yeah, doesn't that look like somebody who was just shot at? Traumatized as hell, isn't he?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. It looks defiant in the moment. The picture looks defiant. So you've got fragility versus defiance. And you might be right.
Like I said to your producer, Trump is a Marmite. You either hate him or you love him. Nothing has changed.
Well, you can't say that. I mean, you can. You just did.
Based on what I'm reading and seeing, and there's a ways behind. Even since the debate debacle,
yes,
the people behind Biden are even more behind Biden because there is no other candidate.
And when that becomes clear, so that could be interesting as well. When it becomes absolutely beyond doubt that Biden will be the candidate in November, that might have an effect on the polls as well. But I don't know. I hope you're right.
Biden will be the candidate in November.
I know that. I know that. But it hasn't. Okay. It's not crystal clear yet, is it? I mean, there is still talk, and there will be less talk now. But there was a lot of talk last week about him not being the candidate in November, but that's the bit I just don't know. The voter we're describing, who I think you're convinced doesn't exist, and I hope doesn't exist, is the voter who could go eeny, meeny, miny, mo, convicted felon or Sleepy Joe, and this will push them towards the convicted felon as opposed to the visibly old man.
I don't see it. The same people that supported Trump are still supporting Trump. I'm not seeing anybody anywhere say, "Oh, this has changed my mind."
No. I wonder if anyone's listening who fits into that category. This has changed my mind, as we often say on the program. There is no point having a mind if you never change it. Although this would be a fairly harsh test of that theory. How on earth could you change your mind about a choice between, flawed goodness and abject depravity, simply because unforgivably and unconscionably the vessel of abject depravity has been the victim of an assassination attempt? It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. The number you need is 0345 60973. This from Isaac both agrees and then kind of disagrees with what Paige just said to us. Paige, I think the first American accent of the morning, contending that the attempt on Donald Trump's life in Pennsylvania this weekend won't make much difference to the election in November because support or opposition to him and Joe Biden is already fairly baked in. I guess turnout then becomes a key player. But this is interesting from Isaac. After the assassination of Joe Cox, James, we saw no change in the Brexit narrative. So logic might indicate there'll be no overall effect of this despicable attempt on Trump's life. But I worry that there is a fundamental asymmetry at play here. The narrative of the right is one of victimhood. Those on the left seem to me to be much quicker to denounce political violence. I completely concur with that. I don't even think it's a suspicion. I think it's obvious that the identity of a target has no bearing at all upon what the reaction of an honest person should be. But when Nancy Pelosi's husband was the victim of a horrific attack, Donald Trump's response was characteristically disgusting. And his son, I think, made jokes about going to Halloween parties as the attacker. So that's a great phrase, a fundamental asymmetry. And that's why I worry about talk of unity. or at least talk of dialing down the rhetoric. Because there's a fundamental asymmetry between truth and lies. And if the people on the side of truth, or at least evidence-based politics, start toning down the rhetoric that they deploy to describe people dedicated to lie-based politics or grievance-based politics or division-based politics, who benefits? Who benefits? I don't know. But we should probably have a little listen to some of what Joe Biden had to say in an address to the nation from the Oval Office.
You know, the political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down. We all have a responsibility to do that. Yes, we have deeply felt strong disagreements. The stakes in this election are enormously high, and some have a different view as to the direction our country should take. Disagreement is inevitable in American democracy. It's part of human nature. But politics must never be a literal battlefield, or God forbid, a killing field.
And yet you think back to the events of January the 6th and wonder where the voices from the Donald Trump camp were condemning what was seen there or what was seen then. They kind of revisit that territory, revivify it. And that you end up then with Biden calling for a reduction in the rhetoric deployed to describe the depravity of Donald Trump's politics, while he does what? He claims every criticism of him is of a piece with the assassination attempt. And then we're back to where we started. How many Americans fall for it? How many Americans fall for it? Daniel's in Newcastle. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I haven't spoken to you in a couple of years, so I've got a fresh bout of nerves, so bear with us.
Well, welcome back, Daniel. Welcome back.
What I liked in your opening dialogue was, for a brief moment in time, and very brief, that's too big of a word, that you shelved Donald Trump's past misgivings to highlight how iconic that image was of him raising his fist. But your shelves are neon lights. We're not we're not turning our back on that. But I think a lot of his supporters now, and potential new supporters, are happy to look that way in the safe and throw away the key. Yeah. And it doesn't change. Like, albeit what happened to him is ridiculous. You can't let go. You can't forget what he actually has done up to this point. Now, obviously, he's calling for unity and whatnot, but I actually think the unity was instigated by Joe Biden. I thought his statement, after what had happened, was very powerful. I thought it was a great move on his part. I think, regardless of who it was, take the people away from it in that moment. I think that would have been the case, whoever the president was at the time and whatnot. But actually, he was very coherent. He condemned, obviously, the action of the would-be assassin. And I thought that actually could retain some of his support. Now, some of the floating voters might go to Trump because, at the end of the day, he's just survived an assassination. I think that's going to win him the election, in all honesty, because look what I've survived. You know, like, if I can survive this, I can survive anything.
Yes. The problem is, I'd agree with you about Biden, but then I read that message from Marjorie Taylor Greene, talking about the Democrats tried to kill him, and she's an elected representative. With whom does Biden's statesmanship land, except people who already see him as a statesman? Maybe it would be slightly reassuring to people who can only, from the last month, remember seeing the footage of that disastrous appearance at the presidential debate. But I don't think it reaches into Donald Trump's support. Nancy Pelosi has come out and thanked God that Donald Trump is okay. When Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked in his own home in a really vicious fashion, Donald Trump was joking about it. He was joking about it months later. We're back to the fundamental asymmetry. Again, is there any way in which it doesn't matter much, in which everybody, we're all talking, we're obsessing today about the changeable minds without actually having found any, aren't we?
I don't think it's going to matter too much to the... Unfortunately, I'm wary of the time and what day of the week it is.
Yeah, of course.
Without trying to go dark into it, I just think... This is based on what I say. I don't want to talk for anybody, but I think there's going to be a large percentage of the Democratic Party that would be a bit disappointed with the result, let's say. And that's a pretty dark thing to say.
No, I know. Well, okay. I mean, you mean they wish the assassination had been successful?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you can say that out loud. You're not describing your own views. You're pontificating. I don't know that I agree with you. Maybe in some sort of very theoretical universe. But if you are a politician, and in many ways, the more political you are, then the more disturbed and horrified you should be by political assassinations. But then you do think back to Joe Cox. That poster that Farage unveiled just hours previously, and the attitude he adopted to campaigning in the immediate aftermath. So maybe not all politicians do respond in that way that we'd expect. Daniel, thank you. 10:54 is the time. I find that phrase, and it's not flipping out. I don't want Isaac to think he's suddenly turned into Oscar Wilde, but I do find the phrase fundamental asymmetry underpinning almost everything we're talking about, which is why I don't know what unity would mean in Donald Trump's world, and I don't know what dialing down the rhetoric means in Joe Biden's. Stuart's in Sherborne. Stuart, what made you pick up the phone?
I'm calling from the perspective of an individual that's had a near-death experience like Donald Trump has. Obviously, not been assassinated, but from...
Well, nor has Donald Trump, to be fair, but you haven't been the victim of an attempted assassination either. I love this. I have this obsession at the moment, Stuart, with people who turn on the show right in the moment that you start speaking. And so they've tuned in today, and the first thing they've heard is, I speak from the perspective of somebody who has had a near-death experience. How does it inform your responses to the questions we've been asking today?
I think he might change
Really?
because it's one of the more common things that does actually happen. You have a life reevaluation.
Wow.
So, for example, it's really common for, I know this is people that laugh when they say it's connected with Donald Trump, but, from the point of view of material possessions and the way you deal with people, and you tend to think of things from a different perspective.
Yes.
The other aspect of it that worries me, having sort of been through it, is the PTSD aspect. Donald Trump, I know, irrespective of his position, he is a human being.
Yes.
And when he starts to process what's actually happened, the PTSD could be quite horrific, potentially. So obviously one of the ways that manifests itself is in reckless behaviour.
Well, how would we tell?
This is very true. I'll just throw it in there to just make all the anti-Trump people more happy.
How did it change you?
I used to be really obsessed about work all the time and possessions, like especially cars.
Yeah.
And I used to drink a lot. Okay. As soon as I came, I was put into a coma. They said they might not come out.
Right.
And then I
They told you that when they put you under, did they?
Yeah, they did, yeah.
Wow.
I asked them, I said, is this life-threatening? And the guy looked at me like I was some kind of idiot and said, there's no guarantees at this stage. And it was like, oh, well, fair enough. Better just do a quick will. And then I was under.
Good Lord.
And when I came out, that's when I had the NDE thing. So that was quite weird. But, with Donald Trump, with what's happened to him, I think for him as a personality, this is just such early days because in his mind, you can't get away from the fact that it was the nearest of near misses that anyone could possibly have had. And if he does start to suffer from...
That resonates with this. I mean, it's only one interview to one outlet, and I don't think there's any audio recorded, but he said himself, oddly, echoing what you've just said, that reality is just setting in. I rarely look away from the crowd. Had I not done that in that moment, well, we would not be talking today, would we? So that does speak of the things just settling in. I remember people talked about how COVID might change him. They talked about how it might change Boris Johnson, the sort of confronting your own mortality, having a deep psychological effect on him. It didn't happen then, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't happen now.
Yeah, precisely. And I know he's a divisive figure, to put it mildly, but I wouldn't put it past, I wouldn't put it beyond the realms of possibility that there is an actual change in the way he deals with people.
And
we'll
comes
soon
back
find
better.
that out with
He
the new
comes
speech.
back better, is what you're suggesting. I hope you're right, because I'm an idiot.
Better from the perspective of the whole world and all the people that.
No, I agree with you. I hope you're right. But the only reason I describe myself as an idiot is because and you can't stop hoping. That's the whole point. You can't stop hoping that goodness wins out over badness, not just in political frameworks and landscapes, but in individuals. Everybody, you hope, will come to the view one day that actually possibly their energies wouldn't be best served by attacking others on the basis of their ethnicity or gender or geographical origins or whatever it may be. But hey-ho, we'll see. That speech is indeed on the way. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. That idea of turning down the heat of Joe Biden, what would that actually mean, do you think? What would that sound like? What would it do to facts, evidence, campaigning?
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I think we'll stay in America, although the domestic political landscape is getting a little bit more interesting as well. We may talk about solar farms. I have never quite mastered the art. I'm not sure anybody else has, to be fair, so this isn't an outbreak of uncharacteristic modesty, don't worry. I've never quite mastered the art of making phone-ins about matters environmental as interesting as some of the phone-ins we have about other issues. But when I heard Tom Swarbrick earlier, who's standing in for Nick this week on The Breakfast Show, mention that the solar farm to which Ed Miliband has just given government permission, government approval, is 11 square miles. I don't know where you are at the moment listening to this, so but my comparisons don't work really. But I am 11 miles away from my mother-in-law's house, which is just beyond Twickenham, where the rugby takes place, and I'm in the middle of Leicester Square. So if you've got even a cursory grasp of the geography of England's capital city, that's bloody miles. Well, 11 to be precise. But that is all. Did I hear correctly? Did I hear Tom correctly? 11 square miles covered in. That's absolutely epic. And I think it's fantastic. Don't tell me I've got this completely wrong. Anyway. That's my attempt at fallibility for the first time this morning. We'll have a look at that in a moment. So we may talk about that a little later in the programme. I'm also drawn towards so-called ghost children who are not going to school. I think it is one of those areas where we need to buy a new dictionary. We need to buy a new dictionary because the conversations we would have had about truant pre-COVID and the conversations we have about truant post-COVID, as a consequence of both the behavioural impacts of lockdown and the rest of it, and also perhaps the continuing medical impacts of COVID. It's 3 solar farms covering an area of 11 square miles. So we'll have a look at that. We will have a look at that. It's a heck of a lot of space. The vocabulary we need to have a conversation about children not going to school now is going to need to be very different from what it would have been before COVID. But we return to Donald Trump. We return to America. And we return to something that really crystallized as a thought in the course of the conversation that we had in the last hour. I know what a square mile is, by the way. Stop sending me messages. I've got a grade E in AO level statistics. I know exactly what a square, and I can do algebra as well. You go 11 miles in that way, and then you go 11 miles that way, and that's 11 square miles, isn't it? No, I didn't. I knew I'd got that wrong. So you go. It's like 11 would be the total of timesing one side by the other side. So it's like 3.3 miles that way and 3.3 miles that way. Still pretty big, but Twickenham, you can relax. There's not going to be any solar farms in Twickenham. That was close. 7 minutes after 11 is the time. Stop sending me texts about square miles. It would not be 130. Yes, exactly. 11 miles by 11 miles would be 132 square miles. This we're talking about 3.5, give or take. 3.5 miles that way, 3.5 miles that way, and fill in all the space there with solar panels. One day, we'll work this stuff out before the microphone comes on, and it will be much the duller programme as a consequence. So in the course of the conversation about Donald Trump, we kept returning, didn't we, about the attempted assassination upon Donald Trump. We kept returning to the question of waverers, the question of minds that may be susceptible to change. But since the January the 6th tragedy, I don't know what word you would use, atrocity, the question of Donald Trump's appeal has hardened as well. So I think we can get our head around all of the isms, whether you like it or not. People are forgiving of apparently awful behaviour if they are susceptible to a sort of cultish appeal. And you understand how racism works. You understand how sexism works. You understand how misogyny works, how Islamophobia works. We understand how anti-Semitism works. All of the isms are susceptible to intellectual analysis. One of the best ways, and sometimes those words seem a little unfair because the impulse people are feeling is, in their own mind, logical as opposed to illogical. And the whole point about a phobia or an ism is that it will be logical, illogical in the mind of the person that holds it. So I can explain to you my favourite theory on how this stuff happens is the theory of the queue. So what a lot of Donald Trump supporters believe is that they have been standing peacefully in a queue, waiting for their fair share. I think you saw this a lot with Brexit as well. Been standing peacefully in a queue, waiting for their fair share. And they have been successfully persuaded that various people have pushed in front of them in that queue and either delayed their access to their fair share or denied their access to their fair share. And the way that right-wing media and right-wing politicians have operated over the years is to persuade the people standing peacefully in the queue that those pushing in front of them are from various minorities, right? Up to and including women, who are not technically a minority, but for a certain type of man, the idea that women now are taking the stuff that would once have been theirs is a very seductive rhetorical device. Now, it doesn't mean that the identity of the person in the queue will be male, white exclusively. But you might be a black woman, but you've been persuaded that we're paying too much attention to gay people, or that we're sending too much money to Ukraine, and that your place in the queue, your wait for your fair share is being delayed by something completely different, even as the person behind you in the queue is convinced that you're the reason why he or she isn't getting their fair share. So there can be women in a queue. There can be people of colour in a queue. There can be Hispanic people in the queue. There's all sorts of people. Everyone can be in the queue if they've been successfully persuaded that the queue is being unfairly abused by people different from them. This, I think, is what is meant by identity politics. And it works. So that's what I mean when I say I can get all of the isms. I can get all of the isms. But what I can't get is why January the 6th changed nothing. Because I can persuade myself that my position in the queue is being extended unfairly. But that will never take me to the place where the bloke who's describing the queue to me can also persuade me that an election result is fraudulent and that it somehow justifies an attack upon the Capitol with a crowd baying for the blood of his own vice president. That's the bit I don't get. Of all the things I've been wrong about over the years, the idea that the January the 6th attack upon the Capitol, obviously both desired and incited by Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election, of all the things I've been wrong about, the certainty that that would be a game changer in the context of international politics is probably the biggest thing that I've been wrong about. Because how can that be? I watched those images that night and I thought, to my enduring embarrassment, I thought that British journalists who'd been warm towards Donald Trump would now become the most passionate critics of him. I thought they'd discover the zeal of the convert, all of the people who claimed that the liberals had exaggerated the threat that Donald Trump posed to democracy, to peace, all of the people who claimed that liberals were hysterical or or exaggerating, even as they glossed over things like the attempt to conflate lies with truths by calling the lies alternative facts. even as they glossed over the vicious personal abuse of everything from Gold Star, the families of Gold Star dead soldiers, right through to disabled journalists. They could gloss over all of that and claim that the people condemning it and the people criticising it were exaggerating or hysterical. When that mob made its way to the Capitol, and remember, Donald Trump is still pledging to exonerate those people, to pardon people convicted of crimes in that space, convicted of crimes on that day. He's still supporting them. He's still bigging them up. He's still championing them. And it didn't change anything. And I still don't get that. Because that means there's something going on that is much bigger than the queue. At least I think it does. Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps you'll bring the queue back to me and explain how that analogy works perfectly in the context of an assault upon democracy itself. But that's the bit I don't get. And that's why I began the programme this morning in uncharacteristically cautious fashion by reminding you that you and I don't know what this assassination attempt will mean. We have no clue what it will mean. We've got theories, we've got thoughts. We had a really interesting conversation about it, but at the end of that conversation, we're no more certain about what will happen or what it will mean than we were at the beginning. I suspect that we'll be patting ourselves on the back by the end of the week about the predictions of a kind of attempt at a messianic status, and I'm 99% certain that the valid evidence-based criticism, the prosecutions, the convictions, the tapes, the records, the proof will all be filed under hit job, hatchet, will all be filed under assassination attempt. They'll attempt, and they'll probably succeed among the people that we're talking about now. The people for whom the truth never mattered. The people for whom an attack upon the Capitol didn't change anything. And I want you to talk me through that. Not in the context of all the other stuff, but very specifically in the context of a murderous mob being unleashed upon the center of American democracy by a defeated presidential candidate. And then 4 years later, the defeated presidential candidate is not only untouched and untarnished by his involvement in those events, he is pledging to pardon the culprits and looks set, as things stand, to be back in the White House next year. What matters now if that doesn't matter at all? This might be one where we will invite a few more American accents than we had in the last hour, or it might just be that you've been paying rather more attention to these matters than I have. But just think about that for another minute. What would be the equivalent here? Would be a mob of people at Boris Johnson's behest smashing their way into the House of Commons, baying for the blood of Oliver Dowden. And then 4 years later, Boris Johnson would be the favourite to win another general election. I give thanks that however bad things seem to be here, they've never seemed to be quite as bad as they were there. But that, I think, would be the valid comparison. Would be a defeated Boris Johnson claiming that he'd actually won an election as the counts came in, concluding that he hadn't, and then inspiring or inciting a mob of obviously violent people to attack the Palace of Westminster while baying for the blood of Oliver Dowden. That would be the equivalent event in England to what we saw in America on January the 6th. So, well, do you know what? Someone has spotted that parallel before I did. From Northern Ireland, DR writes, if you replace Donald Trump's name with Boris Johnson's in your head while you talk about him, then you'll have your answer. There'll be no more mystery. I just used that analogy as a way of proving how mysterious it is. But you clearly think that Boris Johnson fans could have been persuaded to behave in that fashion. And maybe you're right. I don't know. But the idea that 4 or 5 years later, you'd not only be promising to pardon the people responsible for the violence, the people responsible for the assault upon the very seat of democracy itself, the people responsible for baying for the blood of your own vice president, but you'd still be lying about the election result, and you would look like marching back into the White House. That's the bit I just don't get, and I perhaps never will, but 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to explain to me why you think the events of January the 6th changed nothing. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
19 minutes after 11 is the time. I forgot that you would not probably have thought that the events of the weekend were a little bit too extraordinary to prompt any unhinged headlines. But I've got at least two for you, which will be coming up in the course of this hour, I think, while we stay with American politics. But how do you explain to a confused outsider, or I suppose a confused insider, as Donald Trump's experiences this weekend, this unconscionable assassination attempt, drags our attention back to the American presidential election a little earlier than it otherwise would have done, Joe Biden's developing fragility notwithstanding. We look back to the last election and we remember the events of January the 6th, and we see nothing in the coverage of this assassination attempt that reflects that reality. British journalists still writing or talking about their admiration of him or their fondness for him, let alone American journalists. So why did January the 6th change nothing? Khalid is in Edmonton. Khalid, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
well, my wife's American, and I travel to the States quite regularly.
Okay.
I think the only way I can explain it is that Donald Trump is a cult. He's a cult leader, and some of his followers are just literally blind followers. Whatever he says, whatever he does, they will just follow him. No matter what. And I think it's a really sad state in state that we've seen in the US, and also increasingly here in the UK.
Yes.
In terms of people not being open-minded, not people questioning our politicians, not holding them to account, and actually saying I'm determined not to be ignorant, and I'm going to find out about a particular issue and look at both sides. We as an electorate have a part to play in these leaders becoming who they are, because we do not actually engage properly. We do not look at policies properly. We do not, look at the dissatisfaction.
Don't get distracted from the central question about January the 6th. No, sorry, I don't mean that rudely. I just mean I don't want to examine the broader malaise on this side of the Atlantic, because it wouldn't happen here, would it? I don't think. And I mean, even if we see Boris Johnson as being a cultish figure, the idea that we'd have a violent attack upon the Palace of Westminster with people baying for the blood of Oliver Dowden. If it happened, the idea that Johnson would somehow be back in the game 4 years later, looking like a return to Downing Street, I'm pretty sure that's unthinkable. No?
Well, it is true. I mean, he did prorogue Parliament illegally, and there was a huge movement to stop that.
That's not the same thing at all, is it? We're watching live television footage of people smashing their way into the Capitol. Yeah. So it is just, they'll believe absolutely anything if he tells them. You would see it as being that simple. They believe that the election was stolen. They believe that Mike Pence deserved to die. But that can't be half the population, can it, of America, or half the electorate?
Well, probably not half, but then he's probably got a base of around 40%, and so it really does depend on those Republicans who don't support Donald Trump, who are looking at the Democrats and saying, well, frankly, I don't want to vote for Biden given his current situation, and saying, well, what do we do? And so,
I can't vote for this guy because of January the 6th, but that doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's got his base is increasing day by day, isn't it? I mean, like I say, his followers, and this incident of the weekend is only going to increase it, isn't it? It's going to make him a martyr figure. It's going to make him some sort of
that is where the conversation went in the first hour. Again, I'd very much like to be wrong, but the idea that now all criticism and all condemnation becomes conflated with the assassination attempt, while Joe Biden admirably but probably disastrously calls for the heat to be turned down from the side of people that aren't describing their political opponents in the kind of disgusting terms that Donald Trump routinely deploys. I don't see it being good news for democracy. But I thought that January the 6th, in a way, was good news for democracy, but only insofar as it would show people what they'd been flirting with and what they'd been teetering on the brink of. And it did. And they're still flirting. And that's the bit I don't get. Brian's in Penzance. Brian, what would you like to say?
Well, I think, in terms of January 6th, I mean, it's best to look a bit further back, even before his presidential campaign, voice recordings coming out of grabbing people inappropriately, and then through the COVID
but I can
pandemic.
I can make sense of all that. Some men want to behave like that. Some women think they like men who do behave like that. People like Nigel Farage can excuse it as locker room talk. And the bit I can't, that's why I don't want to bring other aspects into it, because I can't make sense of how you could watch those events unfold against the backdrop of lies about a stolen election, and 4 years later, nothing has changed.
No, I completely agree. I was just using that as an example of what we maybe had started with and what it's come to.
Sure.
And it seems he could do no wrong the further it progressed, even into COVID and the drinking bleach thing, rather than take the common sense aspects and not drink bleach. His supporters decided to do it.
No, you're right. Actually, that is pertinent, isn't it?
It just felt like a stepping stone, stepping further across. Into what we had on January the 6th. And the problem we have today now is with the recent judgment that he has some presidential immunity regards to things he does in office that are to do with
official acts. Official act. He can't be prosecuted for official acts.
That's it. So where does it stop? Where do you put your foot down ultimately?
I don't know. Where do you think it stops?
I think it should have stopped before January 6th.
Well, I do too, but I mean, this Project 2025 phrase that people keep sharing and reading is actually a roadmap to where it might stop, or at least where it might go next, and it's absolutely terrifying. And as Trump seeks to disassociate himself from it, we're reminded of all the things he's been neck deep in the past that he has then sought to disassociate himself from. Thank you, Brian. How can 233 million, is it that many, US citizens be wrong? And that's the point, isn't it? In that I can make sense of the people in the mob itself going to the Capitol on January the 6th. I can make sense of a few 100,000 people maybe who would have been there if they could be there. But enough people to give Donald Trump the White House again, being sufficiently untroubled by what we saw that night, is beyond my comprehension at the moment. It's beyond my comprehension. What do you care for if you care not for the sanctity of the cradle of democracy in your country? Then you care not for democracy. But you claim to care passionately about an election apparently being stolen. I mean, everywhere you turn, the confusion increases on this one. Maybe there's no answers to it, but hey-ho, I'll keep asking until at least 12 o'clock today. John's in Wembley. John, what would you like to say?
Hi. I think it's the basis of Trump's support is evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
That's what it is. If you go back to history, and you go back to the Ku Klux Klan, that was driven by religion. You go to militias, present day, that's driven by religion. All these groups somehow support Trump.
Yeah, how does that take us to January the 6th?
Right, so January the 6th, again, all these patriots are supposedly Christians.
Yeah.
He uses the word patriot, and he means Christians.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you were to assemble all of the caucuses that you've just described, from the KKK right through to the evangelical right, you don't have enough people to win an election. You don't enough people to ignore what they saw with their own eyes and ears on January the 6th and know that Donald Trump is still promising to pardon the people responsible.
Correct, but we also know that his base isn't enough to win him an election.
So
he has to win over the independents.
Yeah, and how can he do that with January the 6th?
He's not going to.
Oh, you think he's going to lose?
Oh, he's going to lose.
Well, I mean, I'll have a double of whatever you're drinking. I'll have a double. Hang on. I'm talking over you while you're trying to talk over me. That's never going to end. That's never going to end happily. So I'll take a shot of your hopium on that one. But I'm looking at the opinion polls now, which disagree with you. But that doesn't matter. The opinion polls are big enough to return you to the question of how on earth can all these people be supremely untroubled by the events of January the 6th?
Because, unfortunately, America has got history of political violence. There are a good number of people that believe violence is an answer to their problems. Hence the Civil War.
Yeah. Okay. So right, crikey. So they sort of watched it approvingly, even though they'd never get involved in it themselves. Like that, you're talking about tens of millions of people or more who would be comfortable with it because they felt that the cause was just. I mean, that's the only answer that actually fits all of the facts so far, but it's still not one I'm prepared to swallow. 11:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:32, and I think, obviously, or at least for very obvious reasons, today we're going transatlantic with...
Unhinged headline.
So this appeared in Andrew Neil's Spectator, or at least on the website, and perhaps inevitably, given the way that all of those planets align when the really crazy stuff happens, it's written by somebody who I'm pretty sure used to work at the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs, called Kate Andrews. And the headline in the aftermath of that assassination attempt was, "Today, we're all MAGA." MAGA being the sort of loose conglomeration of people, like the women wearing T-shirts, inviting Donald Trump to grab them by their genitals, or the people who sought to secure the murder of Mike Pence on January the 6th at the Capitol. The people who you see interviewed on social media being asked really, really straightforward questions to which, and I'm not knocking this, by the way, I'm a huge fan of the genre, to which they cannot provide a single answer. But if you're getting paid to write for the Spectator, then you respond to the events of the last weekend by concluding that today we're all MAGA.
Unhinged headline.
Actually, I've got another one as well, which is, I don't know which one is more unhinged. This one is pretty good, actually, but it's not a comment piece. It's a news piece. We don't really put, Jeff... we don't really put news headlines in the unhinged headline because this is just like, can't quite believe it, as opposed to someone actually thinks this stuff. So a swan nesting at Warwick University has been accused, the headline is white wing supremacist swan attacks foreign students, and it's a story about a swan that apparently seems to single out people from ethnic minorities for attack and staying with ethnic minorities. This is very much unhinged headline, and this is an opinion piece. Will surviving gunfire be Donald Trump's next appeal to black voters? It may well be that the article is actually quite an intelligent answer to that question, or explanation of what lies behind that question, but goodness me, in isolation, that headline is well unhinged. 11:35 is the time, and talking about being hinged and unhinged, I get the cue. I say this again, I understand how populism appeals to people who feel, rightly or wrongly, that they have been unfairly treated. But how do we find ourselves in 2024 preparing for an election in America to which the events of January the 6th appear to have made no difference whatsoever? I thought that was a moment of enormous historical importance. I suspect the tweets are still there. Well, I know they're still there because I don't delete them, but I suspect my tweets conveyed that night my absolute certainty that we were witnessing something truly, truly epochal. And yet here we are, 4 years later, looking at a rerun of the same election with barely anybody apparently affected by the consequences of Donald Trump's lies about the last one. Stephen is in East Finchley. Stephen, make sense of it for me.
Stephen has an American accent, if that's helpful. You were looking for that.
Well, it's
Stephen
a start.
Is no longer in East Finchley, if that makes a difference.
Okay.
Other than that, I think I want to specifically address what you asked.
Yeah.
But I think it's difficult because you're trying to ask a simple question to something that is a very complex issue.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
probably. Yeah.
So the first comment I would make to you is that your sense that could never happen in England. I would have said on January 5th, it could never happen in America.
Okay.
So it can't happen until it happens.
Yeah.
So don't.
You're warning against complacency, and I think you're probably right to do so.
Okay. So that's point number one. Point number two is why here's where it gets complex, and I know I can't say it all, but
Sure.
I'll try to say some things.
Thank
I
you.
think that what we're seeing is a time, not only in America and the UK, but what we're seeing is a time when the people are so dissatisfied with government, rightly so, that government has let down their constituents, and I don't care if you're talking about Tory or Labour or Democrats or Republicans, they're all the same. Their concern is about their careers, their power, their ego, and what they're trying to accomplish. It's not about the people. They have continued to downgrade what the people get out of government and downgrade their responsibility to the people. Politicians have always lied, but now they're blatant about it. They don't care.
But
So
Trump's the worst exemplar of what you're describing.
Yes, he is.
He's not the antidote. How can he be both?
He is not the antidote. He is a slippery slope. And right now, the people, in my opinion, and I am one time I was a New Yorker. I understand Donald Trump. I think I know what he is. This man is horrible. Never should have been elected. Horrible.
Sure.
Nor am I a Democrat. I don't care. You vote for whoever the best candidate is. But right now, the people say he is telling whatever group he talks to, here's why I'm good for you. And all they care about, since we are all minorities, pick whatever minority you want. We are all minorities. He says what they want to hear. We're living in a post-truth society. They're going to vote for him because they think he's going to help them, and that's all they care about.
But I get that in every other context except January the 6th, Stephen. I don't know, and maybe I'm just using the programme as a confessional box today, but I don't like being wrong any more than anybody else does. I can't believe how wrong I was that night, that I thought everything was going to change, and nothing changed. That's the bit I don't get.
I heard something the other day, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard something the other day. You don't need, maybe from you, you don't need 50.
Don't spoil it.
I know. Well, I'm sure it's not true. But you don't need 50% of the population to make a change. You need 5% or 3%, whatever that statistical number is. And I think that in America, and probably in every country, but I would say in America, it is probably still... It is a very small group of people out of 300 and some odd million who got so worked up and who so believe that America is for them, states' rights, whatever, police state, militia, all that stuff. It just takes a few of them, hundreds. I mean, what is it, a couple of hundred people who did that?
Yeah,
maybe 100. That's 100 out of over 300 million. How they got there, why the police let them down, I can't answer that question. It's a difficult question, but it doesn't take tens of millions of people to be there.
But it's Trump's complicity in it, not affecting the views of the hundreds of millions of people who weren't there and would never have been there. That's the bit. I mean, do they not understand? Do they not realize? Do they not know? Or do they not care? They believe
that he will get them what they want, and what they want is an easier life, and they think he will get that. There is a percentage, and I grew up in major cities. I've been exposed to people in smaller areas, and there are a lot of people out there who are so disenfranchised and who so much believe in either being a Republican or a Democrat, or I suppose or a MAGA or conservative. Yeah. They don't care what the other guy is or who the other guy is. They won't vote for him because he's the other guy.
That's football.
And I've met people like that who have said to me, well, I don't like Trump, but I'm not going to vote for Hillary. Yeah. I won't. I'll never vote for a Democrat. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, well, it makes perfect sense and no sense, doesn't it? That's because you fully understand what they're doing. You just can't really understand why. It's something I've called footballification in the past, where it doesn't matter what's happening on the pitch, your scarf will determine what your response is to those events. And, incredibly, that's the first time we've mentioned football today, given what happened last night. I can't do it. I just can't go there. There are no interesting questions to ask about it. There is no end to the pain. Stephen, thank you. Alan's in Enfield. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Big fan.
Thank you.
Just a quick one on this. I believe it's down to media. I think if you've got the way how the media is split in America, where you've got your Fox News and you've got your OANs, and you've got people who won't watch any other channel or any other news outlet, I think that Fox News kind of played it down, didn't they? Tucker Carlson, he pushed out, I mean, I don't know what his viewership was, but he pushed out a video that was edited and made out that it was a peaceful thing and it wasn't as bad as it was. And then you've got all those commentators on those channels sowing seeds of doubt, seeping into your logic. And if people are already biased and are fans of Trump,
they'll believe they'll believe what they want to believe with just a little bit of help. A little bit of help.
With a little bit. Well, January 6th wasn't that bad, or and they'll believe it because the commentators, the media, they sow those seeds. That's what it is.
Except that on the Fox News undertook a full reverse on the results of the election. And as a consequence of that, they got sued by the manufacturers of the vote counting machines. It settled out of court for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So, but how many people know that? Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Fox News didn't talk about it. And if you're not watching, CNN is supposed to be biased. MSNBC, I think, is not that bad. I do like MSNBC. But if you're not watching those channels, and if you're in the middle of some place and you're just, you're tuned in on the internet, you've got your YouTube algorithm throwing stuff at you. You've got your Twitter algorithm. So you've got the people who believe it, the people who were there. I mean, there were thousands of people in Washington D.C. I think the last fellow mentioned a couple of hundred. I don't know how many actually breached the Capitol, but if you've got 174 injured police officers, there were probably quite a few more than that were protesting. But he literally said, the rally was called "Save America." And he literally said, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And so there are people who believe that. There are people who, whether they responded to that rallying call or not, liked it and agreed with it. And then you've got the people you describe who are sort of lower level enthusiasts for what he represents and don't know enough about the bigger picture to have been perturbed in the way that we might expect them to be. But we're still sitting here, and these are all parts of the answer to the question, but we're still sitting here 4 years later waiting for a complete rerun of the same context. And that is mad, right? I mean, it's objectively mad. The events of January the 6th haven't mattered at all to anybody. I really think it's the media.
Yeah, it must be a large part of it. And social media giving you an even bigger opt-out from reality.
Exactly. That's it. That's really it. I think the people on the other side are bothered about it, but I think the people on Trump's side, they just, as you said, they just need a little massage to say it wasn't as bad as it was.
There you go, here's a little nudge. They were just on holiday. They were just tourists peacefully visiting the Capitol. Jamie reminds us an actual member of Congress has said that. And the fact that he's going to pardon them, and in the sense of, does it matter to the other side? It matters because it gives you a really clear indication of what he is prepared to wave through, what he is prepared to encourage, and therefore what he is perhaps likely to do in the event of getting back into the White House. I think it's a much scarier scenario than when he actually won against Hillary Clinton, because what we feared then, we know now, and it hasn't moved the needle at all. It's crazy. 11:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:47. It's not true that it's been forgotten. Joe Biden, in this address to the nation from the Oval Office yesterday, he referenced it, but it's remarkable how little. Is salience the right word? Salience is one of those words I don't use that often, but I should probably look up in a dictionary before I start using it more. I'm always amazed that the events of January the 6th don't have more salience. Rubens in Liverpool puts it well. It's not just the media, James. The politicians dropped the ball massively in the aftermath of January the 6th. The Republicans should have condemned it. The Democrats should have punished it. But ultimately, it should have all been cross-party condemnation. They wanted to hang Mike Pence, for goodness sake. Nothing happened because both sides were too apathetic in their reaction to it. Relieved, maybe, as much as apathetic. But yeah, I mean, you're right. So when Biden talked about it overnight, or yesterday, it's probably what focused my mind on the question of why has that not been a bigger deal over the course of the last 4 years?
Violence has never been the answer. Whether it's with members of Congress of both parties being targeted and shot, or a violent mob attacking the Capitol on January 6th, or a brutal attack on the spouse of former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, or information and intimidation on election officials, or the kidnapping plot against the sitting governor, or an attempted assassination on Donald Trump. There is no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized. You know, the political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down. We all have a responsibility to do that.
It is 11:49, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So that mention of the Nancy Pelosi attempt, the attack upon Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, someone broke into their house in the middle of the night and attacked him with a hammer while shouting, "Where's Nancy?" So, the question of incitement or radicalization kicks in. And then within a day, I think, Donald Trump Jr. shared an image on social media of a hammer and a pair of underpants, with the words, "Got my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume ready." And his dad, Donald Trump Sr., gave a speech shortly after that attack and said, "We'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job." We haven't done that today, the conversation about what turning down the heat will actually look like and will actually mean. But that's the backdrop against which January the 6th happened. And yet nobody now sees January the 6th as being a particularly significant event, even as Joe Biden stuck it in the middle of that catalogue. I thought it would change everything. How come it changed nothing? 0345 6060 973. Connor is in Worcester. Connor, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. So just, going back to, why didn't January 6th change anything? Yeah. As someone who was in the States when it happened, it was on the news everywhere. Yes. And that day, I remember hearing talks of people on the right that would condemn those acts, not even believing that it was actually people on the right doing it.
Oh, there was claims it was anti-fascist protesters who somehow infiltrated the protests in Washington. Yeah. And yeah, that's right. So they were already either trying to persuade themselves in good faith that they hadn't unleashed this horror, or they were already lying. Right.
And that's kind of what the Trump camp has done across politics, is they put out so many different lies that the people that want to continue supporting them, even if they don't agree with all of the disgusting things that he does, you can pick a lie that suits you and just choose to believe that. And I think that's a huge part of why things get ignored.
This is what Steve Bannon talked about when he described flooding the zone, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's just so much going on that you should never quite understood what that meant, but you provide a compelling possibility. Is it you create so much contradiction and conflation, alternative facts, blatant lies, claims, rhetoric, that you give people carte blanche to believe whatever they want to believe. And you somehow then assemble an electorate that may not, clearly won't all believe the same things, but they'll all believe what they want to believe, and that ends up being to the benefit of whoever's given them carte blanche in the first place. So do you think, but we're talking about hundreds of millions of Americans who will go into the ballot box in November untroubled by what happened, and they've seen people convicted for their involvement in these attacks. They know what happened. They've seen footage of that incredibly brave security guard, but it just hasn't landed at all. Because I think, are you suggesting because we've created a world in which reality itself is negotiable?
I think that's the case, yeah. And you have this breadth of people where some of them believe exactly what happened and fully support it because they believe that the election was stolen, and it's the duty of American citizens armed all over the country to defend whatever democracy they think they believe in.
Yeah.
But then you've also got the people that are like, no, there's no way that these were actually Trump supporters. They weren't real Trump supporters. It was Antifa. And there's everyone in between there. So you've got, 65 million people, 70 million people that are going to vote for Trump, but they're different subsets that all have been fed their own lies and kind of picked and chosen what they want to believe.
Yeah, I think that's probably the closest we'll get to a definitive answer. It's a bit fascistic, isn't it? There's cognitive dissonance there. There's hypernormalization there. But ultimately, it's about the negotiable nature, rendering reality negotiable. While I have you on the line, you clearly pay a lot of attention to these matters. Just talk me through what you think Trump's plea for unity might sound like. We've been told he's going to make a plea for unity in Milwaukee. Given what you've just said, which is almost a distillation of whatever the opposite of unity is in syntactical terms. What do you think that's going to sound like?
Well, I think part of what he's been doing has been trying to unify people, but not unifying people to all believe in one thing, but to unify people against an enemy. And I think what Marjorie Taylor Greene said was, the Democratic Party is the embodiment of evil, or I'm misquoting her, but it was something to that effect.
Yeah.
There is that idea that is spread throughout, people of a right-wing persuasion throughout the country that the Democrats are trying to undermine American values. And if violence is what's needed to, counter that, then that's fundamental to the American idea.
That is pretty bleak, but as you say, it's supported by some of the evidence so far. That tweet, for anyone who missed it, we're in a battle between good. So Joe Biden is calling for the heat to be turned down. Why can't we? He's almost saying, why can't we all just get along a little better, folks? Marjorie Taylor Greene, a key Trump supporter, a prominent Trump supporter, is writing, the Democrats are the party of paedophiles, murdering the innocent unborn, violence and bloody meaningless endless wars. They want to lock up their political opponents and terrorize innocent Americans who would tell the truth about it. The Democrat Party is flat out evil, and yesterday they tried to murder President Trump. I mean, people might be surprised that the law doesn't have a role to play in that kind of public statement. But here we are.
But, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution is freedom of speech, and she can say whatever she wants to say, true or lie, and people will believe her because she's got that following. And those people are part of the constituency that we're describing here. Speaking about the American Constitution, of course, one does wonder how many people turning up for the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee will be wearing those little AR-15 badges that have been very popular at previous gatherings of Republicans and Donald Trump fans, given that is the type of assault rifle that was semi-automatic rifle that was used by the gunman who attempted that assassination attempt on Donald Trump. The other contender for a conversation this morning was about whether or not this will have any impact whatsoever on gun law debate in America. We may return to that later in the week, but my initial response would be nothing else has ever. So why on earth would this? Mark's on the Wirral. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Long-time fan, first-time listener.
Welcome. No, first-time caller.
First-time caller.
You can't be a first-time listener and a long-time fan. Well, actually, maybe that's the only way you could be a long-time fan, is if you were a first-time listener. Carry on. Carry on.
I'm very nervous.
Thank you. No, I know you are. It's only me.
Okay. No, I have a family member, and he is convinced that the people that stormed the Capitol, a lot of them were just out on a Sunday afternoon stroll, shall we say. They saw what was going on, thought, that looks interesting, and if you'd have been walking past, then you'd have probably done the same.
Yeah.
And, this is his view, and no matter what you say, it's alternative facts.
Whoops-a-daisy, I've just battered a police officer.
Yeah.
Whoops-a-daisy, I've just climbed through the window of the Capitol shouting, let's hang Mike Pence. It could have happened to any one of us, and that's what they genuinely believe.
Yes.
But that comes from a place, though. But you don't wake up one morning and be like that. It comes from a slow radicalization, actually, is probably the word I want, to the point where you're kind of denying observable reality.
Yeah. But this is why, I suppose, no matter what happens, people won't see any wrong in what Donald Trump does or says,
or indeed what his most passionate followers do or say. Crikey, it's surprising how many people know people who fit into the category that Mark describes. We've got old family friends in America who are absolutely fully paid up members of the Donald Trump fan club. I mean, pretty close to former friends, old family former friends, because you could either agree not to have any conversation at all about these matters, or ask them questions like how they can possibly justify X, Y, Z, B, C or A. And those conversations rarely end happily. Mark, thank you. It's Connor, wasn't it, in Worcester, making that case that when Donald Trump talks about unity, he might simply mean trying to muster as many people as possible under a banner that Marjorie Taylor Greene will be waving, trying to portray Democrats as paedophiles, even as Donald Trump's myriad associations with the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein were beginning to make waves in the American media. We may return to some of this a little later in the week, but for now, bye-bye America. And back to Britain, where I want to talk about the 1.4 million pupils in England alone that are persistently absent from school. And I want to talk about those children from a place, if we can, of compassion and concern.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to a story about 1.5, give or take, million English school children, none of whom are attending school on a regular basis. I've told you this a few times, haven't I? The first ever producer of this programme was obsessed with this subject. I don't know why, but he was obsessed with truant, because I presume that in his own school days the subject had come up, and he would point out that by the time you're 15, 16, 17, the parental relationship is fundamentally changed from what it was in primary school years. If a 16-year-old says to you, I'm not going to school, then there's not a lot you can do about it. But that is a conversation from a different era, because what we're talking about today, I believe, is children who can't go to school. So among that 1.4 million pupils, you will have some who are what I would have been a little bit like if mum and dad hadn't sent me away to public school. I'd have been hiding in the bus shelter, or I'd have been going around my mates and claiming I was sick. I used to try it. It's quite hard to play truant at boarding school, but I used to try. Sometimes you try and convince matron that you were poorly when you weren't. Other times you'd hope that the teacher just wouldn't notice that you weren't in the classroom. To be fair, the more I think about it, the more I think my mum should be sent a refund for all of the education that I managed to avoid. But given the nature of that environment, I still, I got educated. So I fully accept the existence of children who are opting out because they get bored. But that is not who we're talking about today, because that just wouldn't explain these sort of numbers. 24% of secondary school pupils were persistently absent in the autumn term of this year, and more than 3% were severely absent. So the reason I mention up front that I completely accept the existence of young people who are choosing not to be at school because it's boring or because they don't like it. These numbers are not explained by them alone. Neither are they going to be explained by any other constituency that we identify. They're not going to be explainable by the numbers who have anxiety or depression or mental health problems that prevent them from living the life they would like to live. And neither is it going to be explainable by diagnosed or undiagnosed physical conditions. We're going to be talking about long COVID at some point this week, because I think, well, two things initially. I think that it is a much bigger problem than is being properly reported. And if it's a big problem, which is what first turned me onto it in the statistics regarding people who aren't working, then it is highly likely to also play a part in the statistics involving young people who aren't going to school. In both cases, they would love to, but they can't. But that constituency isn't going to be big enough. And then you've got the behavioural category as well. And this I don't know much about, but it must be true. And teachers in particular might be able to help us with this bit, where lockdowns broke something. Lockdowns broke something. Why do I have to go to school? I love these exchanges that have gone on between parents and children since schools were invented. Why do I have to go to school? Because you have to. Well, I think you'll find that that's a philosophically inconsistent response, Mother. Why do I have to do it? Because I say so. It's the recourse of every parent through the ages. Why do I have to do it? Because I say so. Why do I have to go to school? Because you do. But lockdown, either consciously or subconsciously, contributed for an entire generation of school children. It kind of opened up the possibility that, no, I don't. Why do I have to go to school? Because you do. Well, no, I don't, because I didn't, did I, for ages? I didn't go for months, so why do I have to go now? I didn't die, nothing terrible happened. Why do I have to go to school now? So of all of these things, then therein lies the answer to the number of why so many aren't going. And then parents as well, who probably had that thing broken too. Because what if you're the parent saying, why do I have to go to school? Because you have to. The parent has subconsciously go, oh, no, they don't. Mum, can I have Friday off? Yeah, all right then. Of course you can. Didn't do you that much harm, did it, when you took off the whole of March a few years ago? That's fine. Took off the whole Easter term a few years ago. That's fine. Yeah, you can have Friday off as well. And then you've got perhaps the most worrying thing of all, which may have happened irrespective of COVID and lockdown and the rest of it, which is a sense that education doesn't matter anymore. I don't know how big a deal that is, but I think it's a real thing, isn't it? It doesn't matter anymore. There are so many different ways into this constituency. It could be, well, what's the point? First of all, everything I need to know I can find on the internet. Why do I want to go to school? I love it. Every child in history said, why do I need Pythagoras' theorem, for heaven's sake? But it's like a weapons grade version of that. Why do what's the point? Or look at the jobs market. I'm never going to own a house. There's no point getting an education. So all of these different areas become part of the problem, but none of them really point to an answer of how we fix it. How do you get children back to school? How do you encourage it? Teachers are being told to stop taking the mickey out of kids when they come back after not being there for a while. So you shouldn't be saying, how nice of you to join us. Or perhaps pretend, if I was a teacher, I'd pretend I didn't recognise you. But that's not very helpful at all if you've been off for valid reasons, if you've been off for health reasons, either diagnosed or undiagnosed, if you've been off for behavioural reasons that are a consequence of COVID. You come back after a couple of weeks, and I know the face. What's your name again? Sarcastic teachers. I always rather liked sarcastic teachers, but you can see why the guidance that's being issued now is that you should be a little bit more welcoming. You should mention how good it is to see them. If you are too sarcastic, then they might not be back next week. So what question do you think I'm going to ask? Because I haven't got a clue. I'm drawn by the question of how you tell the difference. How do you tell the difference? And so what I want to focus on is that child of, let's say, 14 years old, who is telling you as a parent or a teacher that they cannot go to school. How do you tell the difference between cannot and will not? And how hard is it for a parent? 0345 60 60 973. So I very much belong to a generation that kind of was conditioned to believe that adversity is character forming. So you end up, often unhelpfully, but sometimes helpfully, you end up sort of gritting your teeth, clenching your cheeks, and pressing ahead with something that you didn't really want to do. I've got to do it. I've got to go. I've got to do it. I've got to push through it. And then you get to the end of it, and you're glad you did it. I'm glad I got that out of the way. It's like homework. You finish your homework. You're relieved you've finished your homework. And guess what? You've probably learnt something, whether you realise it or not. So how do you tell the difference between the children that can't go to school and the children that won't? The children that just... And they didn't used to be like this, possibly before COVID or even last year. Do you know what I mean? That you, as a parent, you are loving and you are caring and you want to look after your child. But sometimes maybe you get a little voice in the back of your head suggesting that maybe I need to be a bit more like my parents and teachers were. Maybe we need a bit more stick and a bit less carrot. But how the hell do you know? How the hell do you know what the difference is? And then for teachers, what's the biggest explanation of all the ones that I've just listed. Maybe there are other explanations as well, but I should have kept a list actually. You've got the mental health issues, genuine anxiety and depression, and that can change from day to day or week to week. You've got the idea that COVID broke something in that simple logical relationship between why do I have to go to school? Because you have to. You've got parents and children affected by that. You've got the good old-fashioned truant, if you like, the child who asked why they're not going to school will simply reply, because I'm doing something much more fun, thank you very much, whether it's sitting at home playing Call of Duty or whether it is, I don't know, running around the park or going to Woolworths to steal pick and mix. I did all of the things you can do instead of going to school that are just more appealing than going to school. That is what I would call traditional truant. So mental health, COVID, traditional truant. Then you've got the what's the point, which I think parents also sign up to. And anything else you want to add to that list as well? But so if you're phoning as a parent or a former child, we're looking at the question of how you tell the difference between can't and won't. If you're phoning as a teacher, what do you think the biggest change is in the course of your career in answer to the question of why are so many children not going to school regularly? Why are so many children regularly missing school? So in some ways, the longer your career, the more interesting your answer will be. But what for you, when you look at the increase in the numbers of children who are persistently absent, missing at least a day a fortnight, what is the biggest difference between today and yesterday, between where you are now in your career and where you have been previously? I, with no qualifications whatsoever, think that COVID has played an absolutely huge part in this for the two reasons that I've highlighted. The behavioural and subconscious differences that lockdowns have made to our relationship with the nature of compulsory behaviour, compulsory conduct. And secondly, the lingering effects of the actual virus. But I don't know. And I guess as a teacher, I'm more interested in the behavioural aspects that you'd be able to describe than the medical, because neither of us are qualified for that. I'll get the phone lines open now. 0345 6060 973. Russell says you've missed out a major cause. Bullying. Don't accuse me of missing it out, Russell. We're all working here together. But I'll put that on the list. And that, of course, nods us back to the last hour, because the man killed by a Secret Service sniper moments after opening fire on Donald Trump at the weekend was, according to all reports, mercilessly bullied at school. 12:15 is the time. And then I don't know how the SEN factor comes into it, but special educational needs as a permanent rather than a temporary health issue being woefully accommodated by the mainstream school system. But why has that got so much worse in the course of the last few years? It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:16 is the time. So there it is, two ways into this. The first talks about ghost children, and the second encourages teachers to be less sarcastic with children returning to school after persistent absences. But I'm knitting them both together, asking you, what's changed? Why are so many more pupils in England, the statistics speak to, but I suspect it's not very different anywhere else. Why are so many more pupils persistently absent, which means they're skipping at least a day a fortnight, and possibly about 140,000 people are missing at least half of their lessons? Maya is in Brent. Maya, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I think one of the reasons is the fact that schools aren't exciting enough or enticing enough. So, they focus so much on, getting through the exams and doing the basics of maths and English, etc. It feels drudgery. It feels like a really hard slog. And if schools had more like, oh my God, the sports team, or oh my God, we've got to do the art project, or...
But this is probably austerity related as much as anything else, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a case of children like socialising, full stop, whatever their issues they may be. Children like being with other children, more so than their parents, basically. So if you actually made your school a place to be where, you do learn, you do read this, you do that, you do the maths problem, but also... You
sound like a teenager justifying not going to school rather than like a parent looking for ways in which to get... Why aren't you going to school? Oh, it's boring, Mum. With respect, that's all that you're saying. And children have been telling their parents that school is boring since Nicholas Nickleby turned up at Do the Boys Hall.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, for example, my daughter through lockdown was so used to not going to school, and after lockdown, she did start having days off here, then everywhere.
But you let her?
Certain things. Well, to a certain extent, yes, I did. To a certain extent, I could prevent it. She was growing older. But the school was so good, they really started making efforts.
How? What did they do differently? I'm intrigued by this. At school, why aren't you going to school? It's really boring. Oh, well, I'll get onto the school and tell them to make it more interesting. What do they do? Introduce PlayStations in the playground, or bring in table tennis tables? It's a bit of an odd one, but I don't want to be dismissive. So what does it look like making school more interesting for children?
Well, for example, for my daughter, it was getting back into the netball team and starting playing championships again and playing competitions again. It was, taking part in various...
so a lot of stuff like that will have withered, wouldn't it, during lockdown?
I think the sports stuff, the kids are into, doing drama, etc., putting on the school plays, all those sorts of things, and just sort of after-school clubs, doing lunchtime clinics to catch up on certain things. There was a lot of effort.
Oh, this is interesting. Sorry, yeah, so I was being a bit unduly dismissive. So what I'm thinking now is that actually lockdown plus austerity pushed things much further than they would have gone in the absence of one or the other. So if we'd had only lockdown and no austerity, or only austerity and no lockdown, then a lot of the declines that you're describing would have been less marked, because they would have carried on playing netball. But when they come back from lockdown, they've got new priorities, no equipment. The combination of cuts to the fundings or whatever it would be, with the emergency of post-lockdown, meant that an awful lot of the stuff that made school more interesting fell by the wayside.
Yeah, because after lockdown, there was such an emphasis on just getting through the exams, just making sure this happened. And so it became more and more...
All right, I take it back. You don't sound like a superannuated teenager making excuses for not wanting to go to school. You clutched it. You clinched it. You just pulled back from that. No, I was being a bit previous, I think. Maya, thank you. So obviously there's some parental responsibility if you're taking a day off when you're not supposed to. But what do you do? Si says you shouldn't give them the choice. Here it is. No parent should ever give their child the choice. So what are you going to do, mate? Seriously, handcuffs, is it? What is it? What is the physical duress that you use to get a child to school who has refused? When they go all floppy in the supermarket. You can't get them off the... You see it, don't you? I was quite blessed in this department. Never happened to me. But when a child is having a tantrum in the supermarket and then they go all floppy, like Just Stop Oil protesters are taught to do, to make them harder to get off the road. What do you do with a 16-year-old doing that? No parent should ever give the child the choice to opt out of school. Well, yeah, they're just words. Is it Fahima or Fatima? Forgive me.
It's Fahima.
It is Fahima. I was about to berate my staff for misspelling your name, though. I've never seen a Fahima before. My apologies to Emily. Fahima, what would you like to say?
James, I'm a teacher. I've worked most of my career within inner city London schools. And I also sit on the board as a parent governor, so I see both sides of it as well. And I'll be honest, the issue at the moment, and I work in an inner city London school, so it's within Barking and Dagenham, and it is low aspiration, and a lot of it stems from home. So that there is a specific targeted group where we struggle the most with as well, because it just is something. It's not a conversation that's celebrated at home.
What's the point of going to school?
Yeah. And it's just something. It's kind of like this chain reaction that's kind of existed from the parents, and then if you go back, it's from the grandparents. It's just never been a conversation, and a lot of it is where now they come to school, but it's just not something it's not motivated. It really stems from home, and I'm a second generation Bangladeshi, and that was like the focal point for our parents. It was all about going to university, going to just constantly just trying to create, go through the education system, but it's slipping. It really isn't something that's spoken about at home,
but that's not new, is it? So that doesn't explain an increase in the numbers of non-attendance.
But it is. an increase now. We've seen it in a lot. I mean, before it was the borough that I work in.
Yeah.
It was it was the white British that we couldn't. We were always constantly. They were our target group that we were trying to motivate.
This is for people who like to jump upon such things. This is when we read reports about white working class boys in particular in schools falling further and further behind. That's who you're talking about. You're talking about schemes designed to address precisely those categories. You're not making sweeping judgments about them. You're responding to statistical research.
Honestly, it's just statistics.
Yes.
Statistics that the school have kind of created from the results, the attendance, everything. And this is our main focal group. And it is, unfortunately, it's just something that it's at home. It's not being celebrated. Parents are...
There's no consequences at home for not getting stuck in at school. Then why would they get stuck in at school?
Exactly. And, one of my other students that I do teach, they come from a traveller background. So that's something else that's quite common within their own culture, that it's okay to miss school. It's absolutely
and to leave early as well, to leave at a much younger age than is legal.
And parents are okay with it as well.
Yes.
So, and that's another one that we're usually...
But why do you think this has got worse over the last few years? Why would any of these things have been exacerbated?
Do you know what I think, James? It's just the cost, the finance.
Right.
The student finance is ridiculous. A lot of parents, is it worth it being in debt so much after 3 years? I mean, I came out debtless.
No, you're talking about higher education. You're talking about higher education now. I'm talking about school.
School, I know, but that was still always spoken about.
Oh, because you were aiming for it.
We were aiming for that was the end goal, but that's just something that's not even spoken about. If there's no point, it's not worth it. There's no point going to university. You just end up in just debt.
Gosh.
So it really does start from, I know, being at school, university seems far away, but that's where it exactly begins. And we've got it from primary school as well.
Just what is this all leading towards? And if you can't see any point to it, then why engage with it? What works then? What are your big successes down to when you take someone from a home where perhaps education is not prioritised and you somehow manage to light the fire within them? What are your best tactics?
Do you know what it is?
No.
It's hard. Schools are stretched, but it is having that one-to-one for those groups of students. And that is a luxury when it comes to a state school, because the schools just don't have money to give these specific groups of students one-to-one. But that is what can somehow ignite that kind of passion for these young children to kind of enjoy education. But that is the only thing that actually works, is where they get that one-to-one support, and the learning is all scaffolded for them, and just having an amazing teacher that can do that for them as well.
But this is an answer to my last question, because this is harder than ever. This is harder than it's ever been in the context of cuts and no teaching assistants and special educational needs children not being properly accommodated, which takes up so much time of the teachers who could otherwise be giving particular attention to the children that need it most for purely educational reasons. It's too many too many snouts in a shrinking trough, isn't it, in a way?
It is, definitely. It's so sad that it's come to this, where education is just seen as it's not valued anymore.
And it's going to make those class divisions bigger than ever, because the middle class kids are still going to be going home to parents who care about this stuff, and they're still going to be taught to aspire, at least for now. It depends how much Gary Stevens you've read on the question of whether or not the middle class are about to be filleted by the greed of the super rich. Thank you, Fahima. You sound like a brilliant teacher. The children that you help are lucky to have you. 20, and that's part of the answer to the question as well. How many Fahimas are there out there, as opposed to, some teachers who've been broken by the system, demoralised by what she describes, and now end up just sort of peddling their way through the motions all day. Jackie's in Benfleet. Jackie, what would you like to say?
I think the statistic is too simplified. I don't think it sort of stresses why the children are not in school. They're just not there. And when I don't know how much of the neighbourhood management program.
Hang on. I don't know how much of the introduction you heard, but we've talked about 6 or 7 different reasons why, and are inviting suggestions as to others.
But I think that for the families themselves, that children don't come to school quite often, not because of their problems, but because of parents' problems.
Gosh.
and I worked for a neighbourhood management program where we had a school that had no parent helpers, children with high levels of absence. I mean, the attendance for the school was under 70%.
Wow.
And they could all walk to school because it was right in the middle of a large housing estate, so there was no reason. But children, some of them weren't coming to school. We put in place basically an education welfare officer that was also a mentor that would go and see the families to try and understand why the children were so persistently absent. And quite often it wasn't because the children didn't want to come to school. They were scared to go to school because they were worried their parents might harm themselves while they were away.
What, harm themselves by accident?
No, they commit suicide because they had such a high level of mental health problems.
That's just awful. And I should have
tried before. And so the child was frightened to go to school because they were worried when they got home that their mum might have.
No, don't talk. We have to be very careful how we discuss this on the radio for Ofcom reasons, and this isn't your fault. But I should have issued some sort of trigger warning there before you said that. And I don't doubt for a minute the reality of what you described, but it can't be that big a contributor to the.
It may not be at that level.
No.
But if a parent's got high level mental health problems,
the child is frightened of leaving them.
Manifests itself. It will have an impact for those that live with them.
And that is something else that's likely to have got worse in recent years as a consequence of cuts and austerity and COVID.
My daughter teaches and has been teaching for about 14 years, and she had the high level of anxiety that children now suffer with is off the scale.
Yes, it is.
And before pre-COVID, that wasn't there. They'd have one or two.
And that makes sense as well.
Magnified itself.
So the last thing we need is sort of bringing in Sergeant Major style teachers to try and bark children back to school.
You need to understand the whole picture. A child isn't a child in isolation.
No.
You need to understand everything around that. And so if you're serious and you want to change things, break the cycle, if you like, you need to have something in place. I mean, I was fortunate enough under the last Labour government to run a big out-schools programme for an education action zone and also run a neighbourhood management programme after.
Well, let's hope the new Labour government...
targeted money makes is incredible.
It was a big thing for Tony Blair and Gordon Brown in particular, wasn't it?
It is. Yes, absolutely.
How much,
but it's the right place.
Of course it is. And people like you, without people like you, all of these situations would be immeasurably worse. And I asked this question cautiously and advisedly, Jackie, and your answer will need to be brief because I'm already late for the news.
Yes.
How and you can't put an exact figure on it, but what I call the traditional truant, which again is simplistic, I fully accept that, but the child who is simply not going to school because he can think of more fun things he'd like to do, even if it's just staying in bed. He's making a choice not to go. How big a contributor to the overall figures do you think that is, the old school traditional truancy?
I think it's less.
Yeah.
I think it's less. And, children truant and then they find they're bored away from school because they haven't got their friends to banter with.
Yes.
The children that truant generally chancing their arm. If they truant persistently, there's a bigger problem.
Wow. Of course there is when you put it like that. It's blindingly obvious, isn't it? But of course the massive majority of discourse around these sort of headlines will be conducted as if almost all of them are swinging the lead or chancing their arm. Oh, wow. Thank you, Jackie. I'm glad you were listening today. 12:32 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Jenny Barsby has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:35 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I say it all the time, but my goodness me, do we get the calls, honestly, from people who actually know what they're talking about. And I... needed a bit of a nudge there. I'm pretty good at this. I'm not bigging myself up. I don't fall into the lazy tabloid knee-jerk responses to most stories or headlines, but I've probably over-egged the role that what I call the traditional truant plays in these figures of 1.4 million pupils, because as Jackie just said so powerfully, if it's happening a lot, it's not happening because they are chancing their arm or taking the mickey. If it's happening a lot, it is bound to be a more complicated issue, or there are more complicated reasons lying behind the the reason for the persistent absences. 12:36 is the time. Just a little, if anyone nostalgic for the election period, I've got a little mystery for you. An MP from which party was elected to the House of Commons without disclosing to future constituents that he'd served time in prison for assaulting a woman? So just have a little guess at that one. An MP from which party do you think managed to get himself elected into the House of Commons at the last election without telling constituents that he had served time in prison for assaulting his own partner? It's a tough one, that, but I'd be interested to see how many of you guess correctly. Back to the question of school absences. Jennifer is in Manchester. Jennifer, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello. I'm a psychotherapist, and I tend to see quite a lot of clients in the sort of 16 to 18 years old bracket, and they're quite often sent to me for sort of being problem children that won't go to school or whatever. And I'm very firmly of the belief that it's not the children that the problem, that the environment is. Yeah. And I think I've seen, like you were talking earlier about, it used to be very much adversity makes you stronger kind of attitude. I think as parents we're a lot better at not doing that now, and sort of encourage children to have their own voice, etc. But I'm not sure the schools have necessarily kept up with that. And
okay.
You know, they're encouraged to be individuals and follow their own path and have a voice at home. And then when you're sent to school, well, where is the opportunity to do that? We all have to do the same subjects. We're not able to learn in our own individual ways or the particular things that interest us. I think children feel kind of funneled all through this kind of direction that is very impersonal and not individualistic. I think that's really hard for kids to kind of balance. And I think if we're going to change our the way that we bring up children and give them more of a voice, I think we can't then be surprised when they communicate with us that they're unhappy with certain things, i.e. education.
I mean, this is generational, isn't it? Because I'm quite a complicated case study in this field, Jennifer, because I spent years thinking that adversity, character forming, was both necessary and good. And it was only, appropriately enough, given that you're a psychotherapist, it was only as a consequence of very good therapy that I realised how much harm all that stiff upper lip nonsense had done me, and how inauthentic, if you like, I'd become as a consequence of believing that things like being beaten as a boy by my headmaster had a positive impact on me. But you can never move away entirely, can you, from your formative influences? So there's still a tiny little bit of me that thinks that some of the children you've just described have got too much agency. What's the point of school if you don't have to do things that you don't want to do? So what am I missing there?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it?
Yes,
because
it is.
I feel the same thing. I want to allow my children to have agency, and then yet when they actually start using their voice to say, I'm unhappy with school, it's not good enough for me, it's not the way I want it to be, we go, a little bit too much agency. Let's punish them and put them back in the box again.
That's exactly it.
Actually, we really need to pay attention and be listening. When children say, and I guess they're saying it by using their feet, so to speak, by not going to school, there is a problem with the school. We then need to listen, and we need to see that how we can accommodate that and make school better for all children, rather than saying, actually, no, you've just got too much of a voice, and we better to start thinking about how we take that away.
And then we're back to the fact that the schools at this point in history are probably less equipped to deal with the extra challenges attendant upon what you described than they have been for decades.
Yes, exactly.
They haven't got the people, but even if they have the wherewithal and the desire, they haven't got the people to bring it in. I asked Fahima this question. I'm going to ask you as well. What works best? And I know every child will be different, but if you've got that child in front of you, and if they've been referred to you, then clearly the question of whether it's won't go to school or can't go to school has already been answered. They feel that they can't go to school. How do you start addressing that? How do you start fixing that?
It's really, really difficult because I personally believe that the adults around them, and that includes parents and teachers and anybody else in their community, need to get together to figure out how they can make school more appealing. So rather than forcing the child to go to school, you change the environment so that they will willingly step into it. And that's a really hard thing to do if my only relationship is with that child and not with the adults around them. Okay,
final question, and this is a real toughie. What if a child can't go to school, refuses to go to school point blank. It's happened to a friend of mine. And then after about 6 months, the 14-year-old boy is furious with them, partly as a result of stuff that's come up in therapy, is furious with them for not being stricter, for not having put down stronger boundaries.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? I think as parents, our children are always going to be angry at us for whatever decisions we make or do not make, aren't they?
But you don't. This is the point, isn't it? So you think, should I push? Should I push a bit harder? Should I be a bit stricter? And then you worry that might push the child into an even. The short answer is there's no objective algorithm in the world that you or that teachers or that parents inhabit. Even every parent will know that one child needs a completely different approach from their own sibling. When presented with the same problems, you'll need completely different solutions. But it's big and it's getting bigger, and my understanding of why is growing with every call. Jennifer, thank you. Toby's in Bristol. Toby, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. We've spoken in the past about schooling. I have stopped now being a primary school teacher, largely for the reasons that you're bringing up today, which is the utter destruction of schooling at primary level by Gove's reforms. I vividly remember the changes that came about in the feeling in school and the attitude of children at primary level who are now teenagers. And it effectively has killed off creativity. It's killed off any form of ability to...
So your phone line's imperfect, unfortunately. It's not your fault, obviously, so I'm going to have to keep it a little briefer than I may have otherwise wanted to. But they will point, as you know, to measurable increases in literacy and mathematical ability.
But to what end? To have they've made the curriculum so inaccessible to so many children by making it arbitrarily, in inverted commas, harder, that you then find there's this huge chunk of children who can't access it.
And so they might have improved their reading and their maths, but they don't like school and they don't feel engaged by school. Toby, I'm moving on just because that phone line went a bit poor towards the end. And we haven't heard from parents really who just won't go, or rather the parents of children who won't / can't go. How do you deal with that? What do you think it's down to? Out of all the options you've been given in today's conversation by today's callers, you can add another one to that as well. But the idea of school not being engaging, the idea of mental health issues, depression and anxiety increasing, largely as a consequence of COVID. We haven't touched upon the physical impact of COVID as well. People who are just shattered all the time, young people who are just much, much more tired than they would ordinarily have been, and increasing evidence that a lot of that might be attributable to the after effects of COVID. And the idea that the system is not moving with the times. So whereas at home a child is now very much encouraged to be the opposite of the Victorian model of being seen and not heard, but at home now children are equals, fully engaged members of the family with agency and opinions and freedom, and then they get to school and they've got to slot back into a regimental kind of world. Many of them kick back against it, many of them struggle with it, and those subconscious struggles can lead to absenteeism. I've got the figures. You may have seen them already. They've been out all morning, but you may not have seen them. I've got the figures of the combined audience for the football last night. My friend Andreas, who works with me, just poked his head around the door during the break there, and he said, "Mr. O'Brien, my condolences." And for a terrible minute, I thought, what's happened? What's he talking about? And then I remembered that he's Colombian, and so for the purposes of last night's football game, he's Spanish. And that was another reason why we haven't talked about the football today, because it's all too unbearable. But after this, I will tell you what the combined audience across BBC and ITV was for last night's final. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:47 is the time, and I didn't get a single wrong answer to that question about which party do you think has managed to put someone in the House of Commons who didn't tell voters or future constituents that they'd been jailed for attacking a former girlfriend. Every single answer, and there were a few hundred, was correct. Either you already knew about this or you just guessed correctly, but it was inevitably, perhaps for many of you, a Reform UK MP. They've only got 5, and one of them is an ex-con. Not that that'll put Nigel Farage off. He, no doubt, visiting America to say hello to the convicted felon Donald Trump, will probably pop in to visit his old mate Steve Bannon in prison as well. And I think, isn't there still a bloke on his top team who was jailed in America for money laundering charges as well? I wonder what it is about all this criminality that is attracted to whatever bandwagon Nigel Farage is driving at the time. It's a funny one, isn't it? 12:48 is the time. And what was the other thing I was going to do? Oh, yes. I don't know how interesting this is. It used to be interesting. When I was a showbiz journalist, the world's worst showbiz journalist, TV ratings were great because I'd get half a page out of them in the in the newspaper. That you get about half a page on what the figures were in last night's big event, if it was a sporting event or someone on EastEnders was getting their comeuppance. The numbers overnight are, I think, a little low, actually. Remember, it was available on two platforms, the BBC and ITV. The first got 17.8 million people watching last night, and the second ITV got 6 million, so that's 23.8 million combined. Doesn't include pubs, and some streaming figures may come out later, but that is only a tiny bit bigger than the semi. So everybody who was interested enough to watch the semi-final is still there for the final. 23.8 million was the overall figure. 10-1 is the time. Back to school and the difference between can't go and won't go, and then perhaps the much more important question, when it's happening a lot, of what you can do about it. Kieran is in Folkestone. Kieran, what would you like to say?
Hello there. I'd like to come from more of a parent's perspective.
Yeah.
Really. My child has just started, he's in his first year of secondary school, and he has to catch a bus to school every day, and it's probably about 12 to 15 miles from our house.
Okay.
But every Monday recently, he's missed his bus on purpose. So as a parent, obviously we've tried taking the phone away, taking the game station away, not allowing him to go out, and then it's us sitting him down asking him whether school is okay if he's being bullied.
Yeah.
And I've got to admit, I'm at a loose end with it. I don't know what the situation is.
Does he go on Tuesday? Is it only Monday?
Goes on goes on Tuesday, and then after speaking with the school, he does really well at school.
Just can't face it on Mondays.
Yeah, just seems, I don't know if the whole going out on the weekends, maybe with it seeing a couple of pals or having a time off, is then his anxiety on the Monday is...
Is that what he tells you? Does he say it's anxiety?
He doesn't, but it's probably a parent presumption.
So you trust him on this? He's not just...
I don't know. At the minute, I'm unsure. I'm unsure.
I'm not in any position to give you advice, but I'd always start from trust. Of
course.
Well, we wouldn't have done. Our dads wouldn't have done necessarily, would they?
Definitely not.
So, and then the school is engaging in the conversation. The school is concerned as well.
Yeah, well, his attendance now this term, it was up with the 89s, 90s the first half of term, and now it's dropped to the lower 80s.
Yeah, it's not great, is it?
Just purely, I think if it drops below 80, then it becomes, it's quite serious.
Yeah, of course, it becomes an issue for you. So what does he do? He goes to the bus stop, misses the bus, and then comes home and goes, I've missed the bus again.
Exactly that. So I drive, but I work away Monday to Friday.
Right.
And my wife doesn't drive and works Monday to Friday. So,
I see.
In getting him to school is an issue once he's missed the bus.
And when you say why, what does he say?
So the first couple of times it was, I just don't like school. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And okay, that's cool. So why don't you like it? What's the issue? Oh no, it's boring, and it's like really blunt answers, and then you try and go on a deeper level.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it makes excuses.
Yeah.
So you can't. I don't know. I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know if I'm being too not strict enough. Or
what are you going to do though? I mean, there's nothing.
I think the only thing. No, we're sort of stuck, aren't we? It's.
I don't know. What's
until the school.
If anyone's got any bright ideas, genuinely bright ideas, then there's still a bit of time for them to ring in and tell you. But you're the perfect example of what we're talking about. We can't pin down precisely what's going on. We suspect it's in good faith. And because by the time he goes in on Tuesday, everything's fine again. Is there a particular lesson on a Monday or a particular teacher?
So I've gone through his schedule.
Yeah.
And every lesson that he has on a Monday, he will have another day.
Okay, so it's not
that. He's
that.
at school. So it can't be that. The teachers are the same. So I don't... the only thing I'm sort of thinking is it the time off that he has?
Giving
he then
him
worries about the Monday.
Yeah.
Then he has the Monday off, and obviously his brother goes to primary school.
Right.
I'm at work. His mum's at work. He's at home with his mum because his mum works from home.
Yeah.
And he's banned from the Xbox.
Right.
Can't do his phone. Realises it's not fun.
Just gets bored again and then thinks, well, I may as well go to school tomorrow. Does he have the... And we don't think he's being bullied?
I don't think he's being bullied because when he's at school, he's meeting up with his friends and after school he wants to go and meet them, and then that's again, we say, no, you can't. You've got to come straight home now because you've had Monday off.
Yeah. And it's not, it's not landing. Have you heard of how much gaming does he do at the weekend?
Not a great deal. He's more of an outdoor kid.
It's not that then. It's not that. I'd be rubbish at this.
He just wants to go out and play football.
Well, I mean, the fact that you're on it and that you care is almost certainly going to be the beginnings of the solution to whatever it is that's going on. But I wouldn't know where to start. Has he got his homework? Is there homework he's supposed to hand in on Monday that he hasn't done?
There's a lot of homework.
Right.
I always go through it on the Friday and the Saturday to make sure that he's done it. So that he goes into school. Yeah, so he can go into school and it's done.
And there's no one on the bus on Mondays that he's got a problem. Could it be the bus that's the issue?
Could be.
A lot of people trying to help you out here, Kieran, but none of us are getting...
I don't know where to start with it, to be fair.
And it might be nothing. It could
be.
You know, like that throughout the ages, 11 and 12-year-olds throughout the ages, is why aren't you going to school? I said, well, because I've established that I don't have to. And that's where the parenting dilemma really kicks in. We might give you a ring in a couple of weeks, Kieran, and see if things have improved. And certainly if anyone rings in now or texts in now with anything that might be helpful, either privately or publicly, we'll pass it on to you. But there it is, because that is a big part of the figures. 1.4 million pupils in England are persistently absent, which means missing at least a day a fortnight. Here we're looking at closer to a day a week, and you don't know why. I've always said you can't fix a problem until A, you acknowledge it, and B, you know what the problem is. Got through a whole show without mentioning Brexit today, but that is currently, or for the last government, of course, that was the big issue with Brexit. But Kieran, a lot of people saying that you sound like a great dad, and I imagine you do a little bit of beating yourself up when you've got problems like this. But Dave says, welcome to the Dad's Helping Dads Hour. What a lovely sounding dad Kieran is. There's quite a lot of that coming in. So, it could be the fact that he knows you go away on Monday, so he's struggling with that. But these are all conversations you can have with him. Hugo's in Hampstead. Hugo, what would you like to say?
Hi, two things. Well, three things actually. First of all, this dad's a hero.
He was a lovely bloke, wasn't he? So, yeah, it was really nice. That.
I wish I heard every father speak about their kids like that. It's really beautiful to hear.
Gosh.
That's number one. Number two is Mondays are beginning of the week, and children, as you said, can find a certain element of anxiety.
Yes.
They can be worried. Again, I don't want to disagree with this man. I just want to give a different perspective of maybe potentially offer him a reward. So let's say he likes sushi. Maybe say to him, okay, Monday we're giving you sushi for lunch, or on the evening we're going to go bond time together.
I think that's great. I do. Go to school today, and when you get home this evening, you can have X, Y, or Z.
Exactly.
It just seemed, carrot rather than stick. They've probably tried that, I imagine, but if they haven't, we can certainly put it on the list. Last word on this, I think, if there's time, to John, who's in Bath. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, Kieran. Hello, James. Thank you very much. Love your show.
Nice. Kieran was the caller before, in case people have just tuned in and wondering what the hell's going on.
So let me just say one thing for Kieran. Me and my wife are coming out of two of the darkest years we've ever had with our child, who didn't go to school. There's mental health reasons. Nothing we could have predicted. Nothing. Everything we tried. And what I would say to Kieran is, accepting where he is now and what he's doing takes the pressure off him and his family, and it has a positive cycle to it. And because I know what he's like all the others are saying, he's a great dad. You're a fixer. You want your family to be fine. So it's almost like accepting where they are. So just very briefly, James, I'm conscious of the time.
Yes, sorry about that.
Out of the blue, my son's in an independent school. He's a scholar. He's a sports scholar. Had the world at his feet. Started school in year 9. Did one term, was going great guns, then COVID came along.
Yeah.
And then after COVID, it never seemed the same again. And it's almost like we've lost him to the person he was, where he was tracking. And at first we were trying to fix it, we were trying to figure out what was going on. The school was brilliant. And the other thing I would say is this isn't a situation that's it's happening in independent schools too.
Oh, very much so. Yes.
With all the support
which have got, no, that's a really good point. All of the facilities and amenities and the room for one-to-one. It is, you're absolutely right. It is by no means confined to the areas where austerity has hit hardest. John, I'm sorry we didn't have longer, but I know that you acknowledge that yourself. Nonetheless, I do apologise, and I hope things get better for you and your family sooner rather than later. That's it from me for another day. We'll be doing it all again tomorrow morning from 10, but if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Ben Kentish is standing in for Tom Swarbrick, who is standing in for Nick Ferrari, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.